What was a bonkers story that a suspect told a cop or security officer that turned out to be true? My dad was stopped just outside of Detroit in the early 70s, flying down the highway in a Boss Mustang. The cop said it's either stolen or repossessed, which is it? My dad was a repo man, and it was a repo. I wish I could have seen his face. No ticket. No idea why he didn't get a ticket, actually. Obviously, repo men are subject to traffic laws. I suspect it's something about repossessing cars in Detroit proper in the early 70s. Not an ideal work site. I used to be an instructor for the security forces students in training, in this case the US Air Force cops. I was a weapon instructor, but we dealt with a lot of dorm inspections and all that other fun stuff. Well, this one kid kept falling asleep in class. After many counselings and some paperwork, he said he couldn't sleep because the devil was in his dorm room. Of course, we thought maybe he had some mental issues going on, but decided to get to the bottom of things. He said every night around midnight or later, he'd hear a voice saying to keep his eyes shut and nothing would happen to him. He was freaked out, so he complied. A couple of the instructors decided to sit with him in his room one night and told him to go to bed like he usually does. Well, lo and behold, around 1 a.m., the instructors heard something in the ceiling. They started freaking out a bit, but watched and waited. Next thing they know, they heard the voice and one of the ceiling tiles was moved and something jumped down. They flipped the F out and turned on all the lights to see what the frick was going on. Apparently, this other kid had been kicked out of the military while in training. He didn't want to go home and face his family, so every night he'd go into that kid's room, scare the crap out of him, and then take some food or something and stretch his legs for a bit. I guess he'd shower during the day but stayed up in the ceiling for the rest of the time. Needless to say, he was promptly sent home, and our freaked-out student was finally able to get some much-needed rest. A few things I want to clarify, though. Yes, the kid was 18. I referred to all the students as kids, since I've been in for about 15 years. All of them look like babies to this crusty old man. This happened around 2011-2012 timeframe at the firehouse, which is what we call that set of dorms. The guy living in the ceiling would say other crap to the kid, leading him to believe that he was the devil, and that he'd kill his family or some other crap like that. And for those asking why an 18-year-old would be such a wuss, I have to say you'd be surprised at the caliber of students that comes through training. They don't all get weeded out in BMT, which is sad, but a lot of them do grow into fantastic airmen and eventually NCOs. I wonder if this flipped the switch on the kid's life into being more or less fine after this, or if it actually haunted him forever and caused ongoing issues. Because on the one hand, great to know that the literal devil isn't haunting you and your family. On the other, that's a long time to be tormented for. So, dispatch advises my partner and I of a 911 call where the caller advises there's a pilot who parked a plane in his yard and then went to a nearby bar. Dispatch advises the caller doesn't speak conversational English and the call was translated via a translation service. Knowing the address is on a lake, I assume that there's been a mistranslation. Someone probably drove a boat up to his dock and went to the bar. The partner calls me. He's on the crapper and is going to be a hot second. He assumes the same thing regarding translations that I do. That's cool. I arrive first. Holy crap, there's an actual plane sitting there in his driveway. Specifically, a seaplane. Apparently it was driven up the boat ramp, then turned into his driveway and shut down. I call my partner. Yeah, you need to come here and see this crap. I go to the bar nearby. Alright, who owns the plane? A drunk guy does. Apparently he was there to visit his friend, landed on the lake and taxied to his friend's driveway. Except he got the addresses mixed up apparently, and now he's been drinking, so I don't want him to move the plane. Turns out, planes are light though, and he just pushed it into the correct driveway. 3 years ago, working in our civil department, the landlord wants his tenants out and says the usual things that set off the bullcrap meter. That they're substance users, criminals, thugs, keeping a prisoner in the mother-in-law suite. The landlord himself is a slumlord, and says outrageous stuff for all of his tenants every time he wants to evict. Turns out that it was actually true in this case, at least partially. The tenants were a man and his elderly mother. They were keeping the man's developmentally challenged brother padlocked in the mother-in-law suite of the house with no plumbing or electricity. This family had been doing a rent-to-own thing with the landlord for about 10 or so years, and only recently stopped paying. Turns out they'd been feeding the brother through the mail slot in the suite's door, and the interior had no furniture besides the most disgusting mattress you can imagine. We don't know how long he'd been kept in there, but I've never seen a more revolting place in my entire life. These are not my pants. As we were cruising around town, we spotted a guy, Jim, who was wanted for questioning in relation to breaching an intervention order. He was in the passenger seat of the car with some other guy we didn't know, Bob. We pulled the car over, arrested Jim, and put him in the back of our car. As we're searching his car and searching Bob, Jim was one of our local substance dealers, I find a point of ice in Bob's pocket. So I'm telling Bob he's under arrest for substances, and he looks me dead in the eye and says, "Officer, I swear to God, these are not my pants." I almost laughed in his face. "You can't be serious. That's the best you can come up with." But again, he said, "I swear to God, these are not my pants. And that is not mine." Apparently, Jim and Bob had a big night drinking at Jim's house, and Bob had misplaced his pants before passing out. When they woke up, Bob grabbed the first pair of jeans he found and drove Jim into town for some McDonald's, totally unaware of the substances in his pocket. A likely story if I ever heard one. So I open up our car and ask Jim, "Are they your pants?" "Yeah, they are. He couldn't find his own." "Can you tell me anything about what was in those pants?" "Ah, crap. Look, the point is that I didn't actually smoke yesterday." Jim made full admissions to owning both the pants and the substances, while Bob was happily free to go. In short, arrested a guy with ice in his pocket. His defense was, "Those aren't my pants. They really weren't his pants." So I'm patrolling in a beach tourist destination and it's about 2 a.m, so I was on the lookout for drunk drivers. There was a guy swerving a little bit up the road. He was on a back road and there was no one else around, so I decide to check it out. I flip on the lights and the guy pulls over immediately. I start chatting with the guy and he was slurring his words. I ask, "Where are you coming from?" "I'm just heading back to my hotel from the beach." "Any reason why you're swerving?" "I'm on some medication from a surgery I recently had and I'm pretty tired." So I was thinking, okay, buddy. I grab his license and registration, I run it, and it comes back clean. I take a look in his back seat with my flashlight on the way back. Not only are there 2 30-packs of beer in his back seat, the floor is absolutely littered with empty beer cans. "So, what's with all the beer in the back?" "Well, my neighbor really likes that brand of beer and he was house-sitting for us, so we're bringing some back to him as a gift." "So what's with all the empty beer cans on the floor?" "Well, while we were at the beach the other day, we saw a part of the beach that was trashed. I couldn't leave the beach like that." "Alright, buddy, you need to step out of the car." So I make him take a breathalyzer and he blows a 0.0. I make him blow again, 0.0 all the way. Keep in mind, this guy is slurring his words left and right. So I ask him if I can take him back to the hotel and I'll drive his wife back to pick up his car. He agrees. I get to the hotel and his wife was worried sick because he'd been out so late. The wife confirms that he's on medication. He goes to sleep, and as the wife and I are walking out, I start questioning her. "So, I saw a bunch of empty beer cans in the back seat. Does he drink a lot?" "Oh no, he insisted that we spend an hour of our beach trip cleaning up the beach. He wanted to drop off all the cans at the recycling center before he went back home. He doesn't drink at all." "Interesting. There were 2 cases of beer in the back seat." "Oh yes, my neighbor absolutely loves that beer. Can't get it where we're from." It was easily the most surprised I've ever been. And I should add that it wasn't the medication making him swerve, he was very tired, hence why he was driven back to the hotel and not arrested. The medication only made him slur his speech. Yes, it was Youngling Lager. Oh wow, not only was this guy telling the truth, he was also a really good Samaritan who went out of his way to tidy litter off the beach. Just don't drive if you're so tired that you can't go in a straight line, folks. We had a frequent flyer who'd call in at least once a week telling us people wanted to do the deed with him and wouldn't leave him alone. We'd send someone out there and he'd always be alone and it would be unfounded. One night he called and said he was at the store and a man kept asking to give him a down-under kiss. So we go out there and no one else is there. Surprise, but he said the person left and actually gave us a license plate number that had a local address. We went out there and the address was for a funeral home. The vehicle was a hearse and the hood was still warm. After talking to the mortician, he confessed to actually soliciting this guy. For once, he was telling the truth. A friend of my parents worked for law enforcement as a psychiatrist for a time. An older lady was brought in one day, extremely distressed and yelling how her family wants to see her locked up in a psychiatric ward and take hold of all the silver mines she owns. My parents' friend went through the hassle to check the story just to be sure. Turned out to be 100% true. That lady was not one bit crazy. This actually happened to me and I was very thankful for how everything turned out. I was 19 or 20 and went to Applebee's with some co-workers after a crappy retail shift for the half-price appetizers. They were drinking, I wasn't because I was underage. As we were getting ready to pay, a co-worker reached over for his check and knocked over a tall beer that was damn near full straight onto my shirt and lap. No problem, it was an accident, whatever. The staff helped me clean it up and we went on our way, but I was still reeking of Bud Light. On the very first turn out of the parking lot and onto the main road, I had to swerve to avoid what looked like a tire in the middle of the lane, and obviously I saw the police lights in the mirror and thought I was totally screwed. The officer very obviously smelled beer and took a breathalyzer that didn't show anything, but he still wasn't sure. He took the time to listen to my story, plus my clothes were still damp, and he took me in the back of his car back to the Applebee's to confirm the story with the staff. Luckily, they all confirmed it was just spilled beer and I hadn't been drinking. He took me back to my car and let me go. The whole process took about 2 hours between him going back and forth with his dispatch and taking me to and from the Applebee's. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I went to a report of a mentally disturbed person who had called the police reporting that the devil called and told him to kill people on the street and then not be alive anymore. I checked his previous police files and he had a massive history of mental health issues. He was taken to the mental ward many times and was diagnosed with a form of paranoid schizoaffective disorder. Anyways, my partner and I showed up to talk to the guy. He was sweating bullets, his eyes were darting around, trembling and totally terrified. He explained that for the past 6 years the devil called him nightly via telephone, and then when he calls for help, the police take him to the mental institute. He says the devil tells him to kill people and then self-delete. As we were about to call our mental health unit to come talk to him, the phone rings. My partner answers the guy's phone at the guy's request. Guess what? Some jerk was using a voice changer and pranking this dude with mental health issues for years, pretending to be the actual devil. I can't tell you how surreal that moment was. The poor man's face changed, kind of, like he's finally been vindicated and he knows that it's not just in his head. So, we investigated that pranker and eventually charged him. The victim of all this was so frickin' happy. I was a detective for a few years, assigned to violent crimes investigations. I got called in one night for a male victim that literally was dumped out of a vehicle at the entrance to the emergency room. He had been shot in the side right around the hip area with a shotty, but was conscious and alert. While talking to him, he wouldn't give any information whatsoever about his name or anything. While in the ER, the doctor informed me that when they cut his pants off, he had a significant amount of smack in his pocket. He initially stuck to his story, and once discharged about a week later, he was arrested for that smack. This is where the story takes the turn. He immediately dropped the "those aren't my pants" story, which is more common than anyone could imagine, but still wouldn't give any more information about what happened. He finally did give all of his personal information, though. He was from out of state and couldn't make bond. So after sitting in jail for about 4 months, he finally decided he wanted to talk about what had happened. Turns out on the night he was shot, he and some of his associates decided they were going to rob a known substance dealer. To achieve this, they dressed up as federal agents with BDU pants, full uniform-style shirts and badges. When they got to the house, they announced they were police, and as soon as he grabbed the glass door, the guy on the inside swung open the main door and fired a shotty through the outer door, striking him. Everyone ran back to the car, jumped in, and on the way, one of the other guys gave him clothes to put on so he didn't show up at the hospital with the uniform-style outfit. Every piece of his story was verified through the investigations, to include the substance dealer who had not replaced the glass door, and it was still shattered. So what's the more serious charge? Armed robbery and impersonating a police officer, or trafficking substances? Because actually I'm not sure that this guy got out of trouble any easier once they learned his crazy story was true. Then again, I guess it still fits the criteria of the video. A couple of rednecks on suspicion of murder tried to sell me on some ridiculous story. Said a group of college kids just showed up and started self-deleting all over their property. They must have thought I was some kind of moron to believe a story like that. This is a Tucker and Dale vs. Evil reference. Great movie. I work in air pollution control. One of our actual officers got an anonymous complaint call through the tip line about a body shop that didn't have the right equipment, was operating without a permit, that kind of stuff. Met the officer out there to inspect the place and see what's up. As I was pulling in, the shop's yard was a mess. Random wrecked cars all over the place, bits and pieces of engines and such under tarps, or just casually laying on a pallet. There's a small pile of tires in one corner. All it's missing is a chained-up Doberman and a razor wire fence. I was glad I had an officer along with me. We walked into the shop proper, and it's even more cluttered than the yard. There's bits and pieces of at least 3 different cars in old milk crates, and 2 different vehicles in various states of disassembly on the shop floor. I told the owner why we're there, and he's kinda confused. Says he has a paint booth that he loans out to a buddy who does his painting for him, but he doesn't do very much work. We go through the whole speech about changing filters and such, and the guy is even more confused. He swears he just bought new filters for the thing. Those things are quite expensive. And he says again that he doesn't do all that much paintwork. I'm not buying it given the state of the shop and the yard, so I ask to see the booth. He walks us into another building, and there's an absolutely beautiful paint booth in there. Everything is clean and the filters are in good shape. He's got the right sort of paint applicators, and all of his containers are covered and the ventilation is hooked up properly. There's not the faintest whiff of paint, let alone some sort of odor worth calling the tip line to complain about. I couldn't find anything to cite as a violation, and there wasn't even anything to warn him about. One of the better body shops I've ever been in as far as housekeeping goes. Now, we're all confused. The officer asks the guy if anyone from any other agency had been out to visit lately. The guy says no. Then we ask if maybe he fired someone lately, since sometimes former employees who get fired will call to complain and try to get their old boss in trouble. Again, the guy says no, just him and his dad that work in the shop, and his buddy that comes to paint. We all scratch our heads, trying to figure out who called in the complaint because there's nothing wrong here. On the way out, the officer casually remarks that he'd like to get his hands on a Camaro like that one over there. That's when the light bulb went off. Turns out the owner of the Camaro was unhappy with the speed of progress on his car. The shop owner had been working on it for free as a favor and had gotten bogged down with actual paid work, so he hadn't had the chance to finish it. They'd apparently argued about it a few days before we got the call, and the rest is history. I was lucky some law enforcement officers saw this happen to me, or I might have been otherwise in trouble. I was on my way to a party with some beer cans and a shopping bag. I decided I should open a beer on the way, only before I do I spot some cops standing close by. So I changed my mind about the beer since public drinking is illegal here. I put the beer back in the bag, still looking at the cops, so I miss the bag and it falls on the ground and a small pebble punctures the can, causing it to spray. Panicked about the beer, I pick it up and try to block the hole, but spraying beer all over myself instead. After some quick thinking, I figure opening the can would actually alleviate the pressure from the hole, and I was right. Only now I'm standing somewhere in public with a half-opened beer can in hand, in broad view of the police, and I'm reeking of beer. Apart from being sober, it sure looked like I was drinking in public. Those cops didn't bother me about it at all. My two buddies hike at night. I don't know why, and in our state you can get trespassing charges for being out after dark in parks. They saw a park ranger they assume looking for them since they parked in the lot. After backtracking about 1.5 miles, they have this dumb idiot idea. The one buddy starts running back up the trail screaming, "Help, there's a bear chasing me." The other buddy is running up the trail making a bunch of bear noises. I don't know how that would go. As my buddy is reaching the ranger, he's like, "Run the other way, there's a bear!" And the ranger runs out of the woods with him. I was a counter-narcotics operator who'd deploy with the US Navy and Coast Guard. One trip we were just patrolling the coast off Guatemala with intel on a suspected trafficking boat. We locate a radio contact in the vicinity and launch a small boat, a 19-footer, with interdiction team. It was an unannounced nighttime boarding, so the idea was speed, surprise, violence if action. Got close, within 30 feet undetected, turned on all the spotlights and strobes and began yelling for all people on board to put their hands in the air. The only person on board was hanging over the opposite side and wouldn't put his hands up. Several times he was instructed to do so or possibly be hurt if he refused. In all the yelling and confusion, no one heard what he was trying to tell us. Finally, the dust settled and everyone took a breath, and the man explained he couldn't put his hands up because he'd caught a shark and was losing most of his fishing equipment. I went over and saw that he had indeed got a 5-foot shark fighting just over the side. We helped him pull it up a little and he beat it to death with a baseball bat. Saved all of his tackle. Didn't find any illegal substances, though. This is one of those stories that would have actually made a lot more sense if the guy was on substances, because why on earth would you try and bring in a relatively big shark if you have the wrong size hooks and only a baseball bat to try and remedy the situation? I live in a small town in Australia. This guy was out fishing in the bush when an elephant goes running past. So he reports it to the cops, who proceed to laugh and ask what he's been smoking. The next day, someone came in to report a missing elephant. Turns out some circus elephants had been retired to a local farm. Night shift in an extremely rural part of the home counties in the UK, about 3 a.m. on a Wednesday. The call comes in that someone's pulled up to the victim in a white Range Rover, jumped out and held our informant up with a sawn-off shotty, and their iPhone was taken about 30 yards from their own front door in a quiet residential street. We turn up to the informant's address and I weirdly remember the street but can't place it. I go inside and the informant is on the internet looking at new iPhones. Slightly suspicious. We talk and he tells me about what's happened. He doesn't seem fazed at all. As we're talking, I remember the street as I was there a few months ago for a burglary a few doors down, and he had recommended that the owner get CCTV. I go over there, and sure enough, there's a CCTV camera above his garage. I wake him up and view it. Sure enough, it happened. Everything. Got the registration of the vehicle, and the RO was arrested for armed robbery. The weapon turned out to be a replica, but it was just so bizarre. You wouldn't believe how many calls we get about people accusing someone else of tricking them into drinking pee. It happens at least once a month and sometimes once a week. One time it was true and we went after the guy. Some prankster called a hotel, got the guest to think he had a transmitted disease, and needed to bring a cup of pee down to the front desk. He told them not to cause an alarm, so just put it on the desk and walk away. Then the guy called the front desk and said that he was a sport drink CEO and had a new energy drink for him to test out. The guy drank pee. It went viral and there have been a few copycats out there. There's nothing funny about making someone drink pee, people. Alright, service workers, when did you get to experience your very own, "Sir, this is a Wendy's" moment? This is really weird that this became a meme, because I swear this is true. In about 95, I was driving from New England to Florida for a college spring break trip. Somewhere in South Carolina, we stopped at a Wendy's. Near the hallway to the bathrooms, they had a big map of South Carolina, and I said to a person, "Can you tell me where we are?" I was pretty clearly indicating the map. The lady said, "Honey, you're in a Wendy's." I was like, "Thanks, okay, so, no Big Macs then." One time, this older guy rushes up to order and slams a coupon on the counter saying, "I want this." I pick it up. It has menu items for KFC. I ask him, "What exactly would you like to order?" He instantly gets disgruntled with me for not reading his gosh darn mind and shakes his finger at the coupon and said, "Well, whatever's on the coupon, obviously," in a condescending tone. I just look at him for a minute and say, word for word, "Sir, this is McDonald's. I don't know what you want me to do with this KFC coupon." He looks at me dumbfounded. Then he looks behind me at the menu and around the store and yells, "Ah, crap!" Like this isn't his first time walking into the wrong establishment. He then grabbed the coupon and stormed off. "So, you don't have tables?" "No. I'll just have the General Chicken. This is Pizza Hut." "Fine, just a few egg rolls." "How about a pizza?" "Why would I order pizza at a Chinese restaurant?" "You know what? You're right, that would be stupid." I worked at a liquor store a few years back. One day, a man walks in and puts 2 bottles of whiskey down, and as I'm scanning the bottles, I make the usual small talk. "So, how's your night going?" The man took a deep breath, looked me in the eyes and said, "Well, I just walked in on my 14-year-old son completely undressed, video chatting with a fricking middle-aged man, so it could be a lot better." I didn't really know what to say to that, so I told him, "Oh, that's not good. Enjoy your drinks." You know what, I wouldn't know what to say about that either. I think your average server is pretty accustomed to giving completely neutral non-answers to awkward things we become privy to. Take your min-wage job badge and wear it proudly, my friend. Also, that man had a valid reason to need a drink. Dude came to drive through. I opened the window. "Sir, how can I help you?" "I'm out of checks," he replies calmly. "I'm not sure I follow you," I say. "I'm out of checks," he says, again, more impatiently. "Right, I heard you, but I don't know what you want me to do about that. You can pay with cash or card too?" The guy gives me a weird look and says, "Oh, this ain't the bank," and pulls out away from the window. I'm a pharmacist. You know, I think someone at that drive-thru is dealing. More likely this is a passphrase. There was a guy dealing out at the McDonald's near where I used to work, and you had to order some weird combination of things to get your substances. I used to work at Target, and they hired a new girl who'd previously worked at Walmart to work the fitting rooms and, by default, the intercom system. A few days after she started, she was about to make an announcement over the intercom, and I guess habit took over because she started the announcement with, "Attention Walmart shoppers." She realized her mistake and made a good recovery with, "You are in the wrong store." Haha, I frickin' relate to this crap. 3 years at Chipotle, and then I started selling boats at Base Pro. My first call was, "Thank you for calling Brodemore Chipotle. You can't buy a boat there, but this is Base Pro, so you're good. What can I do for you on my first day here?" Facepalm. I was working at Brahms, and this guy went on a whole rant about how Queen and all the bands from the 70s and 80s are working with the government to erase memories, all because he heard a lyric wrong. Y'all wouldn't believe the amount of disappointed rich people who come to Panda Express and find out we aren't serving authentic Chinese food. Once a well-traveled rich woman came into Panda Express and stood at the buffet line for about 10 minutes critiquing our mistakes and explaining how Chinese cuisine doesn't actually have fried wontons with cream cheese filling. Mom, we just fry what came in the bag from a warehouse in California. I was a hostess at Carrabba's. I answered the phone and a woman asked if we were located at such and such intersection. I told her no and gave her the correct directions. She insisted that I was wrong and that we were located at such and such. I told her that I think she has us confused with another Italian restaurant chain, Johnny Carino's. She still disagreed and tried to argue. I finally basically said that I'm standing in the building that I work in 5 days a week. I'm pretty sure I know the location of my physical body, and I hung up. I worked at a pizza place and I got a complaint that we delivered sushi. It was a pepperoni pizza, but he couldn't be convinced. I worked at a Chipotle for 4 years and got some pretty interesting requests, but I'll never forget the time someone ordered soup. Chipotle doesn't have soup. I promptly reminded her that this was a Chipotle, but she insisted we could do it. So we made her soup at Chipotle. It was the grossest concoction of bean juice, sofritas, mild, medium, and hot salsa, and sour cream. She was stoked. I used to work at Taco Bell as a drive-thru guy. I just took people's orders, took their money, and gave them their crap, basically. So there's the usual script you have to follow when a customer pulls up. Hi, welcome to Taco Bell, how are you? And 90% of them say, good, could I get a… and carry on with their order. The kind 10% of people say, good, how are you? And you'd basically say something like, pretty good, thanks for asking. What can I get for you today? Well, one time I got an outlier. I asked, hi, how are you? And defying all convention, this man on the other end, in a country accent, responded sadly, oh, we're not doing too well. It wasn't in a dignified way either. The guy sounded legit upset about something. I was just bewildered. I had no idea what to say. I think after about 5 seconds of silence, I was like, well, sorry to hear that. What can I get for you tonight? The speaking part of that job is so routine that you just become a customer service robot. Then this sad guy comes through and actually is honest about his current mood, and it just threw me off entirely. I had that once working at McDonald's like 6 years ago. This lady, probably in her 50s, comes to the front counter. I say my NPC greeting script of, welcome to McDonald's, how can I help you? And she, straight-faced, staring into my soul, asked if I would do the deed with her. I was astounded at the confidence and sheer bluntness about it, as well as how inappropriate it was. I stammered out something about me being 16 and that's illegal. She then got all sad-faced and started on about a divorce and she was having a rough time with it. I managed to chime in, how about a nice burger for some comfort food? And she ordered one. I never saw her again, thankfully. I worked at the concession stand at a movie theater in high school. This guy orders a popcorn and a large Diet Pepsi. Comes back to the counter about 10 minutes later complaining that his soda is carbonated. I explained to him that all of our sodas are in fact carbonated, and he asks me if we have a microwave. We did, so he wants me to go into the back and microwave his soda. He wants it warm, but not too warm. Went to the back and had to pour the soda into 2 different cups because the original wouldn't fit into the microwave. Just a truly bizarre experience. I don't drink anything carbonated, but this is the first time I've heard that microwaving gets rid of the carbonated part. So is it just sugar water that's left over? It's not that exciting, but in my town we have 2 KFCs. One of them is a joint KFC and A&W. I used to work at the standalone place and would always have people try to order burgers, shakes, cheese curds, and other A&W products because they didn't realize that they're different restaurants. You know what? Reading through this thread is starting to convince me that dishwashing was actually the lucky position. Yeah, you know what? There may be other gross, physically exhausting and underpaid jobs in the service and hospitality industries, but given my own experience with customers and reading about these ones here, the narrator is fairly certain he picked the wrong side of the business to work in. Worked at McDonald's. We'd always get people that would ask for a Whopper burger, either seriously or trying to be funny. Cue the exhausted, we don't sell Whoppers, sir, we have the Big Mac. In response, we usually get an, oh right, okay, one of those. Until one day we have a guy come through drive-thru that asks for a large Whopper burger, and an instant reply back, sir, we don't sell Whoppers here, we have Big Macs or Quarter Pounders or McChickens. He replied, nah, I don't want that, I want a Whopper. Sir, we don't sell those, this is a Macca's. The closest equivalent would be a Big Mac, but it's not a Whopper. If you want an actual Whopper burger, you need to go to Hungry Jack's, which is what we call Burger King here. He replies, "Give me a frickin' Whopper meal." Okay, sir, I can't give you a Whopper meal here, but I can order a Big Mac meal for you. The Big Mac is the closest equivalent we have, but it is not a Whopper. Are you happy with a large Big Mac meal instead? Yeah, was that so hard? We give him a large Big Mac meal at drive-thru, and sure enough, 10 minutes later, he's back through the drive-thru, screaming into the speaker that he hasn't gotten his Whopper burger. And yeah, I'm from Australia. Burger King is known as Hungry Jack's here because when BK first arrived to Australia, there was already a small chain of locally owned burger restaurants in Sydney called Burger King. I worked at Dunkin' Donuts, and one time a customer came through drive-thru and complained to us that the drive-thru was built in a way that made it very hard to drive. She started yelling at my co-workers, so I just put down what I was doing and told her, "Mom, we can't change the construction of the building." Like, seriously, what did she want us to do? I just make sandwiches. Working at Home Depot, I got my face ripped off because this lady wanted to return a label maker, and nothing that we scanned came up in our system. She demanded a manager, so that's when I stepped in. What seems to be the problem, ma'am? I'm trying to return this product, and you guys are telling me I can't. Well, unfortunately, when we scan it on our system, nothing comes up. Are you certain you got it at Home Depot? Absolutely. Ma'am, I apologize, but if it doesn't come up in our system, there's no way for me to refund you. If you can provide a receipt, I'd be more than happy to help you. She storms off angrily and comes back hours later. Hey, so I wanted to apologize. Oh yeah? I found the receipt for the label maker. It was from Office Depot. We had a good laugh, and I told her I appreciated her coming back in. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked at a bakery, and it wasn't uncommon for guys in their 30s or 40s to bring in their dates and place large imaginary orders. Seriously, this happened like 10 to 12 times a year. They'd look at the case and flip through some photos, and then come up to the counter and be all gross, schmoozy, rubbing up on their date like, "Baby, anything you want. You can't decide which flavor? Ma'am, put me down for one cake in each flavor. One whole cake. One donut every flavor. Put a heart decoration on each one." After the first couple of times, we started pretending to write it on scratch paper and then throwing the paper away at the end of the night. They'd never schedule a time or date to pick up, and if you tried to take the order seriously and get details, they'd get rude as all heck, because I guess yelling at employees was also seen as hot in this scenario. It had to have been like one guy at a workplace who did it and told all of his friends because it was so fricking weird, and I've never heard of it being a thing elsewhere. Work at Panera. Guest calls in from his car, several people in the background, all giving orders for pickup. The first order is something simple. The next order is an item we don't carry, a salmon dish of some kind. I know there are some regional Paneras that have or have had salmon, but we're not one of them. So I let them know, "Hey, I'm sorry, but we don't carry salmon. Maybe..." And the person on the other end cuts me off and starts getting really aggressive. "Yes, you do! You do!" they scream. "But I don't. We don't." So then I'm like, "Hey, maybe you're thinking of another chain we're very similar to," and I start to list off some other place, and they cut me off again, screaming, "I know you have freaking salmon! What the frick? I just ate it the other day!" And at this point, I'm just being honest with them and saying, "Hey man, I don't really need this attitude. We don't have salmon. I can't make the dish for you. You have us confused with something else." There's a long silence, and finally someone else, not the person who's been yelling, says, "Wait, this isn't," and he gives the name of a completely different chain. I say, "No, it's not." And then everyone in the car starts yelling at each other, and I hang up. Customer service is the worst. About 11 years ago, I had just gone into management at McDonald's, and they sent me to practice running our location inside a Walmart. Two older ladies, probably in their 70s or 80s, came in, and while one came up to my register, the other sat down about 15 feet away in a booth. They both looked and sounded frail. The exchange went like this. I said, "Hi, what can I get for you today?" The first lady, "Yes, I'll have the lunch meat combo." I'm sorry, what? "The lunch meat combo." "I'm sorry, we don't have that here." "Oh, well, what do you have?" "Well, we have burgers, fish, chicken." "Wait, what is this place?" It's a McDonald's." The first lady turns to look at her friend and literally yells, "They don't have the lunch meat combo here." The other lady, sitting 15 feet away, "What? I said they don't have the lunch meat combo. What do they have?" "It's McDonald's." "What? McDonald's! Where are we?" Lady 1 looks at me. "Just give us a couple of minutes, dear." I say, "No problem, take your time." At that point, I had to step away because the interaction reminded me so much of the SpongeBob episode with the two older ladies and the chocolate bars that I was about to die laughing. So I had someone else take over the register and told them to promo their meals because they made my day. This is wild. At least they seemed nicer than about 90% of the other stories we're reading in here too. And now I have to go watch this episode of SpongeBob to give me some context. Worked at Chick-fil-A for too many gosh-awful years. A guy walks in looking at his phone and says, "I'd like the fish sandwich combo." Cue confused blinking on my part, and then I finally asked, "What was that?" The guy looks up from his phone, sighs, and said, "I want the fish sandwich." I say, "Sir, this is Chick-fil-A. Literally all we have is chicken." He finally looked up at the menu behind me, then around the restaurant, completely bewildered, turned around and walked out. I don't even know how he drove there, parked, and walked in without noticing where he was. Worked at a small roadside produce place. My boss had a few different stalls, so I was often left to run the stall myself. I remember this lady walked up. "Do you have any tomatoes?" "No, sorry, we don't." "But the place down the street has them." "Then go there." Someone asked me, "What type of meat is on the grilled chicken sandwich?" I responded, "Muskrat." He didn't think it was very funny. My family runs concessions trailers at fairs. Lots of great stories, but this one always sticks out. We have a giant 16-bay steam table directly in front of the serving counter. It's old and some pans don't sit quite right, so there's always a bit of steam leaking out. Our trailer is built around one item, pierogies, and the trailer is even called that. All the signs advertise pierogies in big letters. So one day it's like 90 degrees out and sweat is just running off all of us. We're packed, the line is running down the street, and we're 8 servers deep at the window. Customer comes up to the window after standing in line for probably about 15 minutes, sees us with soaked shirts and headbands, steam pouring out of the trailer, and they ask, "What flavor ice cream do you have?" A customer called the store with a very specific request that I did my best to fulfill. She had her husband pick it up. He returned 20 minutes later with food thrown in a bag out of its container and then threw it across the counter at me. His wife called to tell me I would never amount to anything. I was on my final 2 weeks, so telling her to make her own dinner was particularly rewarding. I worked at a Chili's, and when I was hosting, old people would constantly come in and talk about how weird it was that we redecorated so suddenly. And where did the salad bar go? They thought we were Sizzlers, which was 2 buildings away from us. It happened at least 4 times. I also work there, and it amazes me that people make that mistake everywhere. I have people come in to pick up food and get incensed at the fact that we don't have their name on our list, and we must have screwed up. Then I ask what's on their order, and they rattle off food from the Outback Steakhouse, which is next door. They say nothing and walk out the door. Like, I get making mistakes, but how do you miss a giant pepper on the side of the building, expecting steaks with an Australian theme? I worked at a pharmacy and once had a doctor call in to ask if we do doctor's notes. The pharmacist carefully explained that this was a pharmacy and that only doctor's offices can give out doctor's notes. We only receive prescriptions. The man said okay, then after a moment of hesitation asked again and received a gentle but firm no. The pharmacist got angry and hung up with him after telling him no yet again. We received a call from him 3 more times. I picked up the last one and answered, "This is," and I gave a different pharmacy name. "How can I help you?" He started out by asking if we were located on John Street. I said no. Then he asked if we do doctor's notes yet again. After a brief pause where I contemplated life, I just responded, "Sir, we're a pharmacy." He then proceeded to hang up on me. What a jerk. I used to manage a Del Taco during my high school teenage years, and we had an older man come in once a month and drive straight past the speaker to our window. At said window, he'd look at me until I came over, start ordering Starbucks, and then midway through realize it was a Del Taco and drive off. Once a month, every month, for 2 years. I worked in a Jimmy John's. A dude in a military uniform came in asking about a military discount. I told him we don't give military discounts, to which he proceeded to flip out, pull out his phone and start recording a video, ranting about how we won't give him his military discount like he deserves. When I was really young and had recently tried fried calamari, I confused it with the fried clam strips at White Castle. I was adamant that they had fried calamari and convinced my dad to order it for me at the window. They laughed at him. I worked in a restaurant and people can get Deliveroo or Uber Eats from us. A couple of times a week, a driver will show up and show us their phone with an order for a 12-inch sub. Yeah, mate, that's the Subway across the street. We're a pizzeria. Read the address. God knows how they find the customers' houses. I worked at Burger King when I was a teenager. We're short-staffed one day and the girl on the drive-thru was on break, so our manager stepped in to cover her. He was pretty old and didn't have the best hearing, so most customers were pulling around to the window to talk to him as he was struggling to hear through the headset. Anyway, this one guy rolls up to the windows and shouts, "I want a large Big Mac meal with a Coke, please!" Is that so damn hard? My manager very calmly says, "My apologies, sir, that won't be difficult." He leans out the window and points down the road. "There's a McDonald's about 3 miles in that direction, they'll be able to help. Have a nice day, sir." Then he just closes the window and walks around the corner out of sight. I laughed so hard. I worked at Dairy Queen, had a lady saunter in all frustrated, bag in hand, whipped out her receipt without giving me much context and said, "There's supposed to be a buyer blast." I told her, "Mom, this is for Taco Bell." She quickly said, "My bad," and sped out of the restaurant. I think she was making up a story and did it in the wrong store. Also, the number of people who asked, "Do you serve ice cream?" is way too fricking high. What did a crazy stalker do because they had a crush on you? He asked to meet. I told him I wasn't home. He answered with, "But your light's on." He lived nowhere near me. My street is a cul-de-sac, so there's no reason he was passing by. He was creepy in many other ways as well. He told people we were in love. Nope. That we had forbidden love. Nope, nope. And kept messaging me for years. I stopped responding in the first year. I was between 15 to 23 and he was 23 to 31. Even when I was living in another city, he kept telling people about our love. He acted like a normal, sweet guy, so people had trouble believing me. I had to deny more than once that I'd ever kissed him, and I was his friend briefly when I was 15 and ignored him. It only stopped when I randomly met a friend of his in the city I live in and showed him all of the messages. The guy was shocked. As far as I know, his friend talked with him and he finally stopped. Curiously, he began dating a girl with the same name as mine. Creepy as frick. He proposed marriage so aggressively that he had to be escorted off the premises, and then later broke the lock off my dorm room and tried to get into bed with me. I invited her to hang out. She was already outside my place waiting for the call. Took pictures of me while I slept. There was a group of us all sleeping in one room. I woke up to see him taking photos of me. Plucked a hair off of my jacket and ate it in front of me. He broke into my cousin's house and stole my guinea pig to feed to a snake because I wouldn't break up with my boyfriend to date him. She sent me threatening pictures after she found out I had a girlfriend. My state's psychiatric care is a joke. I had her hospitalized multiple times and they'd first pump her full of drugs and send her home. The police were an even bigger joke, and they couldn't understand why a guy wouldn't want a beautiful woman to be obsessed with them. They didn't seem to understand that I needed a restraining order not only for my own safety, but to keep her safe from herself. I inevitably had to be moved out of state, change banks, phone companies, jobs, and I dropped off social media just to have a life that existed outside of her. Several years later, she did thank me for it. Good on you for doing what you could to get away for both of your sakes, and to her for recognizing that she had an issue. Hopefully you managed to get an even better life in your new setting. Found out he'd been telling my co-workers that we'd been dating for weeks, when in reality I'd never spoken to the guy in my life. Found out when I was asked about my crazy weekend with my boyfriend, when I am in fact single as all hell. This was a while ago, in high school, so I don't know if I can really fault him for being an idiot, but he told everyone we knew that I was his dream girl and that we were going to get married. He actively sought out rumors of who I was crushing on, or who was crushing on me, or just any guy who had talked to me and tell them to please, please, please let him have the chance and to not ask me out. Weirdest thing was I didn't even really talk to him and didn't even know his last name. I just said hi during calculus every day. Wrote racy fictional material about me in which I said, "Stop, I'm only 16. He was in his mid-20s at the time. Walked a good 5 miles with me because she was going my way. I was almost home before I found out she lived 30 seconds from the pub I met her in. She said she'd have to stay at mine as it wasn't safe for her to walk home alone. I ended up having to explain that I wasn't attracted to her and had to call her a taxi home and pay for it. Wrote a love letter in blood. Somehow the teacher got hold of it and then the whole school found out. I had someone I worked with at a movie theater ask me out and I told them I wasn't looking for a boyfriend. So, the next time he was closing and I was opening the next morning, he poured popcorn salt all over the office desk and shaped it to say, "Die," and then my name. One of my brother's friends tried to impress a girl by shoving his whole hand down his throat. They stole my hat and refused to give it back because it smelled like me. Paid someone to attack me so they could rescue me. Didn't work. Hit the attacker with a book bag, pinned him down. He started yelling that he had been paid to do it just as the other guy showed up. I was on my way home from work, he knew my schedule, and I took the bus. A junior in high school tried to tickle my pickle in front of my friend when I was a senior because she thought I was cute. This isn't the only advance she made, but after this she lost her mind a bit. I used to be a mall cop, and one of the girls at the frozen yogurt place asked me to prom publicly on Instagram as her Man Crush Monday. I was 20 and out of the high school mindset, so it was pretty embarrassing. I politely declined and the post came down. Not really disturbing, I just always felt so bad that she shot her shot so publicly for it to not work out. These comments make me really glad that I'm ugly. This guy I knew for a while went out of his way to introduce himself to me. He was nice enough, we hung out in a group sometimes. Eventually he started to do weird stuff. He asked me where I'd bought some new clothes and then I saw him the next week wearing the exact same clothes, the shirt and jeans and shoes. Then I started seeing his car in my street at random times of the night. I got up to go to the bathroom one night and to let my cat in, and he was sitting in his car watching my house. I wasn't scared of this guy, he was weaker than me, but it was really weird. He'd call me and put me on speakerphone and then record our conversations. I found this out from a mutual friend. Anyway, I made sure he knew I didn't like it and I stopped hanging out with that group of friends. Then a few months later, I received a call from one of my best friends who told me a story about the same guy who'd copied his exact hair color, which was red and black and blonde at the time. Since then, we always think back to this guy and laugh. We call him Stalker Adam. To be fair, he wasn't dangerous, I think he was just awkward and lonely and didn't know how to cope with his feelings. Snapped my bra strap to get my attention. Put a pipe bomb in my husband's truck. Hey, free pipe bomb though. She stole a bunch of my homework and then asked me out in a very passive-aggressive manner. Then she followed me home, rang my doorbell and demanded I go out with her. We were 14 and her parents drove her. I think I just told her to go home and close the door. I didn't really know how to deal with sociopaths back then, and she took it pretty badly. She did not leave me alone after that. Frequent calls and shaming, but she didn't do anything crazy and it didn't really escalate. I don't know if this counts, but I broke up with an ex because I just wasn't into her. Started dating a new girl and ran into my ex at a party a few weeks ago. She pulled me into the bathroom and showed me her thigh in which she had carved my name into it, claiming she still loved me and we'd only dated a month. I was a 19-year-old waitress at the time, and a 49-year-old man that I'd served tried to connect with me through the missed connections page on Craigslist. He then came to my work and professed his love for me in a Christmas card that ironically had a cartoon of Santa being kicked in the nads by a child with the caption, "Stranger Danger." In his note, he said he wasn't sure if I'd be interested in an older man and he had a wife and children, so we'd have to find a way around that little detail. I didn't feel safe at work, so I had the police intervene and tell him not to bother me again. Well, even if literally every other thing this man did wasn't a glaring red flag, that card showing that child safety was going too far told you everything you should know about him. Nice of him to give you written evidence to assist in your case, though. Showed up at my job and requested me by name, to serve her and her new boyfriend. She kept saying how great he was in bed. He looks like he wanted to be anywhere but there. Trying to do the things my girlfriend did, like stepping on my shoes while holding onto my shoulders, hugging me, among other things. I came home from high school and my college-age crusher was sitting on the sofa chatting with my family. What the frick? I only went on 2 very platonic dates with him. I was only friendly, but he had way more in mind. He actually asked my parents if he could marry me because I was such a virginal angel, despite repeated texts and calls. Goodbye and good riddance. My God. I used to train with this girl who was crude and blunt, but kind of pretty, and she was a heavy hitter, so she'd spar with the lads as well. No girl wanted to be her spar partner. After having my first go with her as partner, I took some hits and realized she was way too strong to duke it out with, so I began grappling. After a few weeks of this routine, she began to get good at grappling as well. It got weird. She managed to catch my back and just whispered, "If I tap you out, we can do it like dogs later. How about it?" And honest to God, for a second I felt like I was going to become an unspeakable act victim right there and then. I learned later that she had a crush on me but was too embarrassed to do anything normal about it. This guy lived a while away from me, so he learned where I studied from a friend of mine. I didn't tell him for many reasons, and he came one day without saying anything to me. I told him that I had classes that day, but he insisted that I should stay with him. Even though he knew I had a boyfriend, he kissed me and bought me a gift. When I told him I wasn't interested, again, he cried and shouted at me. She went through every picture I had on my MySpace and took pictures of herself in the same pose or scene and then sent them to me. She did that around 20 to 25 times. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Oh, I knew a mentally ill girl who had a crush on me for a while and did various stalkery things, including showing up at my work, changing her phone number 4 times to trick me into answering, and running away from home by hopping on a bus to a city 6 hours away, and then texting me at 3 a.m. that she had changed her mind and asked me to come pick her up and bring her home. At no point did I ever indicate any interest in her whatsoever. On the contrary, I repeatedly told her we'd never be together, but it was just in one ear and out the other. But the crap she pulled with me pales in comparison to another guy she also had a crush on. He was living with a few friends, and their place was a pretty regular hangout for a whole bunch of people. Consequently, they almost never locked doors. She showed up and let herself in one afternoon while they were all at work, and he came home to find her sleeping in his bed. He had to threaten to call the police to get her to leave. Another time, she literally hid behind some bushes with a knife, and when he came walking by, she jumped out and told him she'd self-delete if he didn't hug her. Ugh, my stalker married me. I have such a big crush, I'm going to make sure you can't ever leave me by law. A guy that saw me working in Subway once brought his entire family to meet me. I'd never met the guy. I only know who he was because he was with a group of guys staring at me there a week earlier. They apparently waited over an hour. It started asking about me so much that the workers started keeping me updated on when the guy was there so I could avoid him. Broke into my house and laid down on my couch with me while I was taking a nap. Oh god, this has brought the memories flooding back. So this happened in my first grade in school. First, she once walked up to me randomly and started scratching my back. Like just wildly down my back like a raptor trying to claw something. That's when I began to think she was weird. But then there was the main event. The class was sitting on the ground for story time. A girl named F was wearing a purple dress and white stockings sits down next to me. Then as the teacher begins to read, I feel her bite me hard on my shoulder. I scream out in pain and begin to cry. The teacher looks up confused and I say that F bit me. The girl looks confused and says, "But I like you, that's why I bit you." Needless to say, I didn't like her after that. Funny thing was, I did think she looked cute that day. After the bite, though, I made sure to keep my distance from her. I vaguely noticed a car that was behind me the entire way to work from like the second turn I made out of my house. I didn't think too much of it at the time. I pulled into work and this guy walks over to my car and opens the door and I was like, "What the fu- Oh, hey? What's up?" It was some dude I'd served 2 weeks ago named Bob. So he said something along the lines of, "I bought this book for you." We'd talked about how I like to read and he had recommended this author. So I'm still pretty weirded out that he opened my door and we're the only ones in the parking lot, so I just quickly said, "Thank you," and told him I'd see him inside once my shift started. He then goes on to say, "You didn't see me behind you the whole way? I was waving my arms out the window, but you wouldn't look back. I knew it was you because I remembered your license plate is," and he just read off my number plate. At this point, I'm just calculating in my head how to get the frick out of the situation and internally just freaking. I don't even remember what I said, but it was something to the effect of, "Oh, no, I didn't see you, but hey, I've really got to go in." Oh, but wait, there's more. He then says, "Oh, well, I live right next to you. Are you in the white apartments or the orange ones? I'm in the golf community right up the street. I drove around to the white ones for a while looking for you so I could give you the book." What the frick? I just told him I really had to go or I'd be late. I went inside and hid in the back for like half an hour until he left and told management, and they've put him on the banned list. This was 2 weeks ago, and I've been parking my car 3 buildings over and walking to my apartment because he memorized my plate number. Every time I drive, I've been scoping out everyone around me to make sure it's not him. He mentioned leaving to go up north for a few weeks the last day I served him, so I think he's gone, but he'll be back eventually, and I don't really know what else to do other than keep him banned from my work. I met this guy one time, for frick's sake. Sorry this got so long, it's been stressing me out. Nobody had a crush on me, I was the one having said crush. I wrote my phone number on a potato and rolled it to them when I was in 9th grade. I never got a call. Not my brightest moment, to be honest. The old Irish hello. I think you should have tried it out a few more times just to be sure, but then again I guess it's not a winning method for everybody. A classmate of mine who I barely talked to came up to me on Valentine's Day and handed me chocolates and a huge teddy bear with my name sewn into it. A bit weird, but I was appreciative of the gift. However, the worst part is that they handed me a drawing of me leaning on a motorcycle in very revealing clothes that looked kinky as all heck. Keep in mind that my fashion is quite conservative. And they then proceeded to loudly recite a 2-page-long love poem in public whilst I was with my friends. The poem referred to me as his princess, love of his life, among other things. I rejected him and never spoke to him again. You know, when I read that first paragraph, I was thinking, oh, that's too much, but the intent is kind of sweet. Then the second part, and oh no. He cornered me in the hallway when I was on my way to the restroom and proceeded to lean forward, purse his lips, and close his eyes, like I'd been waiting to kiss him my entire life. I proceeded to tell him, "Not today, Daniel," and go about my business. Also, the kid was 5 and I was his teacher. Alright, I should clarify, I'm 5'9", and by cornered I mean ran up to me in the hall, stopped about 2 feet in front of me, blocking my path, and then did the above. Of course, he was 5, so it wasn't really that difficult to get around him. Daniel did this on the regular, actually. His home life wasn't amazing, and I got the feeling he was just starved for attention. A lot of the other teachers, especially the ones that had him before me, didn't think he'd amount to anything since he was always acting up in class. But I like to give all of my kids a chance. Once I gave him a little more one-on-one time that he really needed, he stopped being so disruptive and apparently developed a crush on me. She made me a poster board, scrapbook style, of the moments of our friendship she'd interpreted romantically. Show up at my work at like 4 a.m. and stare into the dark restaurant watching me while I prepped the baking for the day alone. They also advanced the creep and started showing up in my apartment building at weird hours. Told me she had dreams of unaliving me and actually had plans too. It creeped me the frick out, but still I could see she had some serious mental problems and I tried to help her as much as I could. I mockingly called her my special little snowflake while flirting. She had never heard of the label snowflake before. The next day she shows me her new tattoo of a snowflake. They hid in a closet while I did the deed with someone else. Not so bad, but freshman year of college, I had a girl in my class both semesters, and she would not stop staring at me or trying to sit next to me. She'd make comments like, "I like your voice," or uncommon stuff like that, and when I said I had a girlfriend, she called her a hussy. He announced he had a crush on someone in our therapy group while staring directly at me. The entire session was derailed to awkwardly deal with his feelings while I wanted to melt into the floor. We got coffee one time after a group session and he went and did this. I was 19, he was 25, and he knew I had issues with social anxiety. Top 5 worst experiences of my life, hands down. When I was in high school, a painfully shy girl in my art class secretly painted a portrait of me. We were supposed to paint a portrait of a historical figure. We were assigned 6 classes to work on our projects. She shyly showed it to me and said, "This is you." I was stunned, especially since in her eyes I looked like Marty Feldman, the guy who played Igor in the movie Young Frankenstein, only less attractive. Also, one of my ears seemed to have taken flight and was about half an inch away from the side of my head. Since her painting was in my hands, I gave her my portrait of Ben Franklin to her and stammered something and left. Upon reflection, my Ben Franklin probably did bear a passing resemblance to her. I mean, not the glasses, but, you know. They started speaking in my native language when nobody taught him and listening to the same music as I do. I'd never shared my playlist with him. Weirdest case I've ever had is where a girl challenged me to a table tennis match, but she used her flip-flops as dual-wielded pedals. It was 2 a.m. One stood on top of a desk and asked me to kiss him in front of the class. Yeah, that was odd. Next one kissed my knee? I don't know what he was doing. And then there was the one who bullied my little brother and called me bad names all the time because he thought it would get me to like him. No, calling me a fat slag isn't going to get me to be into you, honey. She asked if I wanted to go on a date. I said no. She undressed in the middle of high school and asked, "How about now?" while caressing her body. I said no again and went to my girlfriend, now my wife. Asked me if I had a boyfriend. After I said yes, he didn't like that. Red flags started going off in my head. They made me an axe with my name carved into the handle. It was pretty crude and it was the most bizarre display of affection I've ever received. Anytime they don't take no for an answer, it always weirds me out. I told the guy no several times today while I was trying to work and that I had a boyfriend. Ended up telling him, "Sir, I have a boyfriend and I'm 7 months pregnant." His response? "Oh, I'm very good with kids." What was it actually like to be on reality TV? How real or fake was it? Several years ago, my cousin went in for a tattoo at the shop from Inked. You know, the one in Vegas. It was an off-filming day, so none of the artists from the show were in. He got his tattoo started, and they asked him to come back in a few weeks when it was healed up to schedule an appointment to finish it. When he showed up, filming for the season was finished. The shop was closed, cleaned out, and the space was for sale. You know, that seems somewhat fraudulent. My dad sued my mum and they both ended up on Judge Joe Brown because Judge Judy said no. My dad is a scumbag. He dodged child support payments for close to 8 years and didn't contact me or my sister during that time, from when I was 5 to 13. When I was 13, he popped back up out of the blue and wanted to visit, but he lived in the Ozarks now and we live in New England. So he flies out for a couple of days and we visit, don't really hit it off, and he goes back home. A few months later, we get a letter from some producers in LA saying my dad called the number for Judge Judy and filed a lawsuit against my mum, demanding she reimburse him for the money he spent to visit us. It says Judge Judy turned it down, but they had a new show yet to air called Judge Joe Brown. They wanted my parents to appear on that. If she said no, there was no legal jeopardy for her. The show is for entertainment. It also said my mum could file a countersuit against my dad. So being really angry, she did, for everything from school tuition, to books, to dentist bills, to my sister's speech therapy, food, school supplies, clothes, and fricking everything for 8 years. It came out to about $150K. Now, the filming date is scheduled and it happens to fall on my first day of school. My mum decides that's too important a day to miss, so I'm cut from the trip. They fly out, get put up for free in a nice hotel, free meals, spend a while in hair and makeup, then start filming. Within 3 minutes, the judge boots my sister from the room, saying that a little girl doesn't need to see her parents fight in public. Good guy. The judge listens to both my dad and my mum. My dad's reason for suing was that my mum lived too far away. The judge asks who decided to move to the Ozarks. The judge calls my dad a moron. Judge listens to my mum list off all of the crap my dad skated on. Judge says if he could, he'd give her every dime she asked for, but the limit is $5K and she's getting all of that. The judge tells my dad he should be ashamed. My mum calls my dad a deadbeat on national television, crossing that off her bucket list. Both she and my sister got a bonus $300 appearance fee and cards from a bunch of people who book extras and backgrounds for soap operas and stuff. Then they spent the next day at Universal Studios, the same day as the MTV Movie Awards, so they all got to watch all the limos arrive and some of the red carpet for that. Then on the flight back, they ran into some soap opera actors from General Hospital, which is my mum's favorite. It was a good trip for her. Ha! You know, I always felt like the people on these law shows were just roundly being exploited, but I'm happy to be proven wrong in this one case. Screw you, author's dad. I was on set for a filming of Ghost Hunters in Buffalo. On the show, they're investigating an upper level of the Buffalo Central Terminal when they hear a disembodied voice say, "Get out!" It was the property manager on a lower level yelling at some homeless people to clear out. Everyone knew it was him, but it somehow made it into the show as an unexplained event. When my wife and I were looking to buy a home in Michigan, our agent told us we had the opportunity to be on House Hunters if we wanted to. We talked to some person from the show and they told us the basic process. We'd buy whatever home we wanted, then they'd film us there before we moved in, as though we were just looking at the place, as well as 2 other prospective places that they'd selected. Then we'd ultimately choose the house we'd already bought and live happily ever after. We watched a few episodes, or I did, my wife already liked the show, and I convinced my wife of how stupid they'd probably make us look, so we passed on that. While at a bar in New York City, someone approached my dad and his buddy asking if they wanted to be on a gourmet cooking show. Naturally, they agreed and asked if I, a 14-year-old at the time, could join. The promoter said, of course, gave them the location and told them to tell me not to eat a big lunch, as it would be a large multi-course meal at an upscale restaurant. I skipped lunch that day after a rough lunchtime soccer match and left school early to meet my father and his friend. We arrived in a strange part of Manhattan, near the Hudson, in a rather dead part of the city. We got a call from the producer saying, "Sorry man, wrong location. We're sending a car to pick you up immediately." We hopped into a taxi and boom, you're on cash cab, the bald-headed host declared as lights flashed above our heads. So, we lost, got kicked out in Chelsea, and ended up spending our own money on food and a taxi home. It was very upsetting. I was on This Morning when I was about 7 and they did a big makeover for me and my siblings. The premise they created was that we were a nightmare and my poor mum just wanted us to look smart for an upcoming christening. The main part I remember was them telling us to jump in the mud and shout no when our mum asked us to stop. Normally, we wouldn't have dared, so I remember that being fun. Oh, and my sister ruined her hair 3 times before going on stage, so they made us hold her hand so she couldn't touch it. I have several friends that were on the first season of Moonshiner on the Discovery Channel. It's totally fake. I mean, they do make moonshine, but what you see on the show is not what it's like in real life. Most of them are licensed to sell alcohol, and do sell it locally at the package stores. The others only make a little to have for themselves and a few friends, more to keep up a family tradition than anything else. But the producers had them set up stills in the woods and even told them what to wear to make it look more like a backwoods, redneck, good old boys thing than anyone in this area has looked in 50 years. Most of us sat there with the guys that were being filmed, watching the episodes and laughing at all the people that probably think this stuff is real, while drinking store-bought beer. The hard stuff is only for rare occasions. It'll rot your gut if you drink it all the time. I worked on Love It or List It. The reactions at the time of the reveal of the house were meant to be real, and they actually signed a contract saying they won't go in the house before renovations are complete. 99% of the work isn't done by the people shown doing the work on TV. It's done by subcontractors. The entire staff works until 1 or 2 a.m. the night before filming to get the house ready. Most of the stuff they put in for design purposes was taken back after the shoot because it wasn't part of the homeowner's budget. We got blacklisted from several stores because we'd buy thousands of dollars of stuff and take it back after we shot. I was on Jerry Springer. The episode never aired, but the entire thing was fake. They even asked me to find friends to complete the storyline of a double love triangle. Coolest part of all of that was when they literally asked me if I wanted a fake doctor's note or a fake death certificate made out in a fake family member's name in order to get me out of work. They literally had a guy on staff whose only job was to get people out of work so they could attend filming. My ex was scheduled to appear on Jerry Springer once. His girlfriend at the time was an exotic dancer, and their show recruiters went to the club she was dancing at to pick up girls for upcoming episodes. She agreed to film and managed to get a deal where my ex would get to appear on the show with her. Behind-the-scenes negotiations involved coming up with a storyline and light scripting. The plot would be that he was appearing on the show to propose to his stripper girlfriend, and she would reveal that she was actually a working girl and would introduce him to her pimp. The showrunners loved it and even agreed to provide an engagement ring for the bit. So he woke up for his morning flight, turned on the TV while he packed, and watched the Twin Towers fall on live TV. September 11th blocked his chance at white trash fame. Well, that was a wild roller coaster of a story. Of course, we all knew that Jerry Springer was more fiction than any given anime, but the story leading up to this guy's cancelled TV appearance, is just stranger than any story the writers could have come up with themselves. When I was in university about 7 years ago, we got an email inviting us to take part in 60-Minute Makeover in the UK. It's a show where a person's family calls in a team of experts to totally refurnish their house while they're away from home for the day. The audience at home are led to believe that all of the work is done within 60 minutes, and they make a point to start their countdown on camera and rush everyone in to meet the deadline. About 10 of us joined the makeover team at about 8 a.m. on the day, and were given flat-pack furniture to make outside the house before they started the makeover. The crew had a skip outside where they threw all of this poor, unsuspecting guy's furniture, only to be replaced with all of this cheap stuff that was only available to him via sponsorship of the program. They list all of the new furniture's manufacturers in the credits at the end of the show. They also masked off all of the skirting boards and light switches ready for painting before we were let loose inside. We were let into the house as a member of the ITV crew declared the start of our 60 minutes. After 30 minutes of frantic, patchy wall painting, carrying lamps, uncomfortable seating and chipboard coffee tables into the house, we were told to vacate. We then had lunch in the street while the experts went in to clean up our mess and then did it all again for another strict 30 minutes. After we were finished and the official 60 minutes were over, there was another period of professionals tidying and filling our crappy decorating, before we all gathered outside and waited for a man to come home from work. He'd find that all of his furniture had been smashed into a skip outside the house and replaced with stuff that may look good on camera for a couple of seconds during a quick sequence, but would be very disappointing to live with. This man would be very happy about his makeover, and we'd leave the scene as more experienced, well-rounded students with an insight into TV production. My cousin was involved in filming for The Bachelor, not as a contestant, and said that they film many scenes in several different ways. For example, they might film them cuddling while walking, and then walking while looking annoyed, and so on. Not that fake, but yeah. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. In Holland, there was a Dutch version of Pimp My Ride. A player of a football team we played against had his car pimped, and the car didn't even make it home. He had to call the car repair service on his way back from the studio. My mate was on tattoo fixers. If you don't know what it is, basically they get people with tattoos they regret and make a design they don't tell them about, tattoo it on top and cover up the old one, and surprise them at the end. He filmed the big surprise reveal like 5 times because he wasn't surprised enough. Not me, but my best friend was 16 and pregnant. Now, I don't know if this is always the case, but none of the drama on her episode was fabricated. However, at one point, they did ask her to reenact a conversation that she had with her mother off camera. The funny part is they had her reenact it about a week after giving birth, so she was no longer pregnant. To hide that, she wore a big sweatshirt and held a teddy bear in front of her tummy, so you couldn't tell the difference. My sister's friend's family was on House Hunters several years ago, and everything about it was staged. They'd already decided on the house before the show even started filming, and another 2 options that the couple was considering were found afterwards. They filmed a bunch of fake conversations between the family members to make it seem like they were still making up their mind. The thing is, this was a Latino family and every member struggled heavily with English. The conversation scenes were obviously forced, as these people were just stumbling their way through scripted English sequences, and it was obvious that they would have been having conversations in Spanish if they were on their own. The issue was so bad that I'm surprised they even aired the episode. I was on an episode of Wife Swap. One of the wives was a burlesque dancer, so her new husband had to MC a variety show of which she was the headliner. I was the juggler in that act. Full disclosure, I'm pretty sure all tape with me on it is on the cutting room floor. Anyway, it's pretty darn fake. The people are real and a lot of their interactions are real, but a lot of scenarios are staged. Okay, now we're going to plan for the show, but make sure Wally, the new husband, takes over. He had never done anything showbiz before, so naturally we tried to help him, but the director kept telling us that he was in charge and he needed to be doing the planning. I caught a moment of a personal interview as well. Honest answers, but very much being steered by the camera crew and director. During the show, the crew said they needed to get sound levels, so they had people sit quietly, clap politely, clap normally, clap loudly, among others. I'm fairly certain that this was so that they could have clips showing a range of responses. In the end, the whole show bit got about 4 seconds of screen time. Waste of 2 days, no pay for us. What the actual fudge? I mean, I knew that these shows were complete bullcrap, but you'd have thought that they'd actually pay the people who they're literally rounding in to do what sounds like legitimate acting, as in doing stuff as commanded by the director that isn't real. So dumb. I was on a European version of Survivor, where we went to an island and had to survive for 2 weeks. Whatever was seen on camera was what was actually happening. The only fake thing is that we got some food to maintain a somewhat healthy diet. My girlfriend's best mate was on a similar show here in Australia. She said there was a lot of clever editing, obviously, but that the crew fed them plenty of booze and a little bit of food. I actually have 3. A friend of mine was on The Bachelor. This was years ago, and she ended up being one of the last 4 girls. She said they were constantly fed alcohol, were put on a strict sleep schedule where they were literally put to bed and woken up. Also, there were no clocks anywhere, so all the girls were in a constant state of alcohol-fueled disorientation. There were no chance encounters where the guy is just sitting on a couch and the girl goes up to talk to him. All of that is staged. Even their conversations were reshot over and over if their reactions weren't right or if their wording was off. The entire thing was completely controlled, and she said no one really knew the guy because none of their interactions were real. Another friend of mine's house was on House Hunters. He wasn't on the show himself, but his house was the one that was picked. And yes, it was sold and all the paperwork was signed before they filmed. He was there when they filmed all the segments, but wasn't allowed on camera. And my wife was on America's Got Talent. She was a dancer for her friend's act. She said they lived in a tent for 4 days in the parking lot. She had a very positive experience, though. She said she met a lot of cool people and that it did feel genuine for the 1 episode she was on. Her friend made it through that round but got eliminated the following week. I was on an Australian reality show called Surprise Chef. The premise of the show was that the celebrity chef would meet someone at the supermarket and then cook dinner for them. On my episode, I volunteered at an aquarium. The story in this episode was that the chef met my boss at the supermarket, then cooked all of the aquarium volunteers a nice surprise dinner. Of course, this was all pre-arranged. There was no meeting by chance. We all knew what was happening, so for the scene, we all got surprised in the shark tank. We knew what was happening and did 7 takes of fake surprise. The celebrity chef cooked nothing. He went in for a few takes and an actual chef cooked all of the food, while the celebrity stood outside chain smoking. The food was average, basically local RSL quality, chicken parm and profiteroles. I think I drew the short straw of things you get in a reality show, a crappy meal. Other people get like cars or renovation makeovers. My brother was on X Factor UK. There are several rounds before the televised rounds, so all of those rubbish acts you see on TV have been picked by producers to go through. I've also been in the audience of The Voice and X Factor, and they make you do loads of fake cheering, dancing, and clapping before the show starts, so they can cut it into the actual show. 90% of the cheering you see or hear on televised shows has been added in post-production. My dad was on Comic Book Men, basically the same as pawn shop stars, but for comics set in New Jersey. He didn't want to sell the item, he just wanted to show it off. It was off-the-cuff dialogue with cast live on camera. He did 2 takes, there was no script. They did ask him to come up with a reason to sell the item, which was based on truth. I was on set with him as the background. It was pretty cool to be there, but I had to stay in the same place for an hour and a half rereading the same crappy DC comic. They aren't allowed to show any Marvel stuff unless it's an item someone brings into a store. The crew spends about 15 minutes hiding all of the Marvel items in the store before shooting a segment. I loved the experience though. I was on Stan Lee's Superhumans. Long shoot at the high-altitude chamber I worked at. They brought a guy who had climbed Mount Everest a bunch of times without supplemental oxygen, 29,000 feet, so we brought him to the same altitude in the chamber with some Westerners to compare against. He asked for oxygen after 15 minutes, and after 30, they asked me to pretend to pass out. Looking back at what aired, it's obvious that I was faking, and they edited the show so that he won the competition. It's Season 2 and Spider-Man is the episode title. I worked with this guy who was on a TV show in England. He said the show producers would tell him he'd get more airtime if he was cheating on his partner instead of just being happy with his girlfriend. They just love the drama and don't care what it costs. Yep, that about checks out. At least it sounded like Jerry Springer had the decency to plan the affairs and fake it with the people on the show, so that he wasn't just encouraging people to ruin their real-life relationships as well as their reputations. I was on a TV show in the UK called Bargain Hunt. I went on it for a bit of a drunken dare and never expected to get past the online application form. But after a phone interview and a bargain hunt tryout day, we got on, as in me and my workmate. I asked my workmate as he was going through a crappy time. It was shot over 2 days. On day 1, we had 1 hour to choose the 3 antiques to buy, and day 2 was the auction day, where we sell chosen items. The only fake bit about it was that we had an hour to choose our 3 items, but we actually spread this over 5 hours as we had to film, get sound right, get lighting right, among other things. And as the TV crew was sorting out lighting and stuff, me and my friend would keep on looking around the antique house for other objects to buy. A guy didn't ask me anything about being on Pimp My Ride. Everything done to the car was cosmetic. I believe his car didn't run before the show and didn't run after. Basically, a polished turd. I was on a reality ambulance TV show when I was an EMT. The patients were real and their medical conditions were real. Everything else about the show was fake. When we filmed it, it was for a bariatric ambulance TV show. In the morning, when the camera crew got there, they filmed us driving lights and sirens around the parking lot. Then we did personal interviews where they let us talk about moving bariatric patients and how we felt about our jobs. Then they made us say a bunch of stuff that we normally would never say, like, "Without us, these patients would die," among others. They used these clips of the stuff they made us say and spliced it into the real-life stuff we said. Our actual ambulance transport scene in the show was 100% planned and scripted. The patient wanted to go to the ER and have some decubitus ulcers looked at. However, this patient, being diabetic, had a high blood sugar of 400, having just eaten and taken insulin. We took that and were forced to treat it like a life-or-death situation, and then they used our earlier footage of saying things were life and death and our driving around the parking lot lights and sirens to make it seem like we were fighting for her life. In reality, in about 30 minutes her sugar was going to go back down to normal and life would be good. The whole experience actually turned me off reality TV and made me realize how fake everything is. I had a cousin on the new Chris Hansen. I wish that was fake. It's not. My cousin was on Hell's Kitchen and said they'd film for over 10 hours a day, then they'd go to sleep around 11 p.m. only to get woken up at 2 a.m. to film again to make them more irritable. The producers would purposely bring up topics to create drama with the chefs. They retaped when they answered the door in the beginning a couple of times to make them seem more surprised. They portrayed my cousin as the classic hot blonde. It was certainly more of a reality TV show than a cooking show. What's the dumbest reason the cops got called to a scene? The reporting party said a pigeon was acting strangely on her deck. It wouldn't fly away. It flew away when I clapped my hands. Also had a call for 2 people riding bikes smiling suspiciously. A lady called because a cat was in her yard. Not attacking anyone or anything like that. It was just in her yard. Even better is that we had to do a report every time we responded to a call, even if no citations were issued. So in my report, I put a cat as the suspect and a calico as its race. I belong to an online neighborhood board. Some woman went off because people walk their dogs and the dogs go number 2 on her lawn. We had all agreed that not cleaning up after your dog is terrible. She clarified and said that, everyone was picking up the number 2, but it was leaving germs on her lawn, so she called the police. Responded to the outside of the county jail one time, the LA County Twin Towers, and had to actually fight a guy trying to climb the fence into the jail. This might not sound like much until you realize that we had to fight a guy in order to prevent him from entering the jail, then drove around the back and put him in jail. LA is fricking weird. I was dispatched to a house in reference to a reported vandalism to a vehicle. When I got there, the guy who called was standing by his car. I saw that there was no visible damage to the vehicle. His complaint was that dust picked up by the wind was coming from his neighbor's yard and landing on his car. The guy actually wanted to file a criminal complaint. My first thought was that maybe I was dreaming this nonsense. All I could do in response was stare at him and say absolutely nothing. The guy became uncomfortable and explained his complaint again. I couldn't help but just stare at him more. At the time, I didn't think I could say anything to him that didn't sound insulting. I think he finally got it since he just went inside his house and never called us again. Well, there we go. So far, the majority of the reasons can be summarized with, the person calling the police was bored and/or lonely. It's sad, but somewhat expected. Let's see if the next story follows that trend. Hint, it does. A few years ago, when I was moving into a house, I was doing most of my moving late at night. The nosy old couple across the street kept calling the cops and reporting suspicious activity. The first time the cops showed up, they were prepared for a criminal. They had their hands on their weapons, flashlights in my eyes, but by the fourth time they just BS'd with me and my family and told the couple to stop calling the cops. I'm not sure what made the couple think burglars would bring stuff into the house instead of taking it out. Once responded to a call originating in the sheriff's department parking lot. Literally walked out of the doors into the following fustercluck. A lady had just been released from the jail and her ex-girlfriend came to pick her up, drunk on a moped. The reason it got reported is that the drunk woman was doing donuts in our parking lot waiting for her ex, lost control and rammed a police car. My training sergeant had always had a saying that ran true to that day. We don't catch the smart ones. Officer here, working 2 years in a large city. The first call that truly made me question my job choice was a disturbance between a husband and wife. Officers had been out of the house earlier in the day and the wife called 911 a second time. The wife called and said she and her husband were arguing because she wanted to do the deed but he refused because her hoo-ha stunk. It was difficult to remain professional. I was an EMT. I was called to a sick person which turned out to be a perfectly fine person that just wanted a medical checkup. And because he thought that all EMTs were doctors, we could just give him one for free since we were already there. Cop here. We have a guy in town who's a paraplegic and confined to a wheelchair. He also has a totally abrasive personality and is an all-round awful person. The county pays for a caretaker, but he either fires them or they quit because they won't cater to his unreasonable demands. He called 911 once because his trash cans didn't get moved to the curb before trash day and he wanted the cops to come do it for him. The dispatcher routed me the call. I called into dispatch and told them that I was absolutely not going out to put this guy's trash out. They ended up sending the fire department after enough cops mutinied and refused to go. Working front desk at a hotel. Customer called 911 on me because I wouldn't give him a free upgrade. My neighbor hated my Mustang. He started calling the cops on me for drag racing. No, I'm accelerating to the speed limit of 45 from a stop sign. Anyway, he started calling the cops on me when it was a pickup truck, the UPS truck, the garbage man coming by. If he heard an engine, it had to be me. I spent a couple of weeks in Germany. One night, my parents got a knock on the door. It was the cops. They had reports of me drag racing again. My parents handed the officers my keys and said, "He's been out of the country for 2 weeks. You can go feel the engine if you want." The police apologized for disrupting my parents' evening. At the apartment tower I worked security for, some Saudi royal family members called the cops because the working girl they hired took their money and ran. The cops said, "Sure, you can have the money back, but you have to admit to misdemeanor solicitation to do so." And before people ask, their cars had KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, license plates, and the Saudi royal family crest on it. Also, they admitted to what they did to the cops, so in order for the cops to take the theft report, they'd have to include the solicitation report. I'd say the cops gave them a break by just letting them all go. Soon-to-be police officer here. When I was doing an internship with the local sheriff's office, I was with one deputy and we got called out on a domestic disturbance. Before we could get there, a city police officer intercepted the call and took it, since it was just outside city limits and we were still 15 minutes away. So we continued to patrol the county when the same people called again, specifically asking for a deputy to come out to the scene. We got there, and right off the bat this woman was going on about how the city police officer was very rude to her and she wanted us to go arrest him and have him fired for unpoliceman-like conduct. That's her exact wording, by the way. I had to turn away to keep from laughing in this woman's face. She was very angry because he allegedly said the F word in front of her daughter. Keep in mind, this woman was using that word 3 or 4 times in each sentence. We pretty much told her that our department doesn't police other departments and that she should contact the chief of police and make a formal complaint. This didn't sit well with her, and she told us that we needed to leave before she called the cops on us. Again, I'm not joking. At this point, the guy I was with couldn't take it anymore and told the woman that he was arresting himself and taking himself downtown, and we left trying not to bust out laughing. If everything goes right, I'll have some more stories once I get hired by the sheriff's office. My grandma was recovering from surgery in the hospital once. She had to share the room with this senile woman. I was really young, but this woman was so memorable. Whenever she needed something, like being hungry, bed raised, whatever, She'd dial out to 911, like multiple times in an hour, because you can call 911 for help, you see? I guess eventually dispatch called the hospital and told the nurses station what was happening, and they had to go in there and talk to her about it. Hilarious, though. Well, it's just nice to have one that was based on a misunderstanding rather than the people being inherently crappy or just desperate for attention. I hope they got the old dear to understand. Oh, so many. A woman found a half-eaten sandwich in her unfenced backyard. She thinks someone threw it in there to poison her dog. She saved the sandwich and wanted us to test it for poison. A man called because his trampoline was blowing away in a windstorm. One woman called because someone stole her American flag from her front yard. One of those little tiny yard flags that are about a foot tall and you plant in your grass. She called the morning after a particularly bad and windy thunderstorm. I had to explain to her that it's much more likely that the flag blew away than someone maliciously stole a 50-cent flag. I then found it in a nearby sewer drain. Also, my dog is acting strange. Can you send a police officer? Happens way more than you'd like to think. My favorite, though, is people who call in because people are driving too fast through the neighborhoods. So we go out there and run radar. 9 times out of 10, the person caught speeding is the one who called in the complaint to begin with. I have a family friend that works 911 dispatch, and her favorite call was when a guy called in because he got his sack caught in his zipper jeans. He thought he was going to die and kept crying on the line. I live in a neighborhood, I drive a black car, and it looks sporty. So I routinely have mums with strollers trying to tell me to slow down. And I'm always going 15 miles an hour under the speed limit. They got to where they'd be waiting for me to come home to just yell at me. They called the cops. The cops sat in the woods for apparently 2 weeks getting my speeds. I didn't know. I couldn't see them. Welp, clocked me under every day going to work and back. They ended up telling the women to leave me alone or they'd arrest them for harassment without me even asking them to do anything. My dad was a dispatcher 30 years ago. Hi, I'm not sure if this is an emergency, but I think my wife is dead. A friend of mine who's a police dispatcher said a woman called the police because her teenager took the rest of the Doritos from the cupboard and wouldn't put them back. So this semester in class, a student had lost the lock for his bike, so he brought it into the classroom and set it against the back wall. This was against the rules because in a 200-person lecture hall, 100 bikes would crowd the room. However, this was a spacious classroom with 20 students. The professor said he didn't mind the bike being there as well. Well, the professor next door did mind. He saw this guy bringing his bike inside and told him it was against the rules. The student said, okay, and walked past. Next week, the professor sees the bike again and says, if you bring that bike in here again, I'm calling the police. The student laughs it off and walks past. Next week during class, there was a knock on the classroom door. 4 police officers had shown up. One had her hand covering her face in embarrassment and said, we received a call that said there was a bike in here which is against the rules, making this trespassing. The bike needs to leave or else we have to arrest you. The student said he doesn't have a lock and it will get stolen. The professor knocks some sense into this kid and tells him to go home because it's not worth getting arrested over one lecture. In the end, no arrests were made. I don't think there was a fine either. Police officers all had a look, saying, why are we here? And they just seemed super embarrassed. The professor who called the cops probably got the bad end of that deal, though. The professor whose class was interrupted had a lot of clout at the university and didn't take kindly to the whole situation. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. There was a lady that called the cops on a homeless shelter because they wouldn't let her turn the dorm into a sauna. She said she was freezing but refused blankets and wanted to use a fire hazard space heater. The cops came, saw the dorm was over 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and told her it wasn't an emergency and left. Had an elderly frequent caller report trespassing. I showed up and didn't see anyone around but her. She said the mosquitoes were landing on the neighbor's dog droppings. She distressingly explained how the mosquitoes would then fly over the fence onto her property. I heard a 911 call where an old woman called the cops because she couldn't open a jar. The woman actually sent the police to help. I went to a house for suspicious footprints in the snow. The footprints led to the oil tank, so I checked the mailbox with the homeowners and found an oil delivery receipt. Wait, you can call the police and they'll show up because of weird footprints? I got the impression that most people at least concealed the real petty reason for their calls until the officer was actually there, like the lady who called about the trespassing and only later revealed it was mosquitoes intruding on her property. These old person needs something calls we're seeing so much happen more frequently than you'd think. I was an intern with my local police department for about 4 months. Small town of about 10,000 people. Here's a list of the really dumb ones we got. 1. An old woman couldn't back out of her driveway and asked for an officer to help spot her. 2. A woman couldn't find out how to turn off her dryer and was worried about flooding. 3. An old man's alarm clock went off and he couldn't figure out how to turn it off, and he was physically unable to bend down to unplug it. 4. A 17-year-old girl asked if there was traffic in town. That one really made me mad. And 5. An old woman literally just asked for an officer to come over. Turns out she just wanted someone to talk to. And you know what? For each of these calls, an officer was sent over to assist. A lot of people don't like cops, and sometimes it's deserved. But for the most part, cops are just normal citizens who want to help people. The first time my parents left me home alone at age 7, I called the cops because there was a man with a wrench in our fenced-in backyard. I got really scared and thought he was going to break in and hurt me. Turns out he was just fixing the pool heater. My parents weren't expecting him since he was returning to finish a job he started yesterday, which my parents thought he'd finished. The guy decided hiking the fence was easier than coming to the door and asking to be let in, plus he assumed no adults were home since no cars were there. He was in plain clothes. The cops were very nice about it and didn't yell at me, even though I dragged them out for no reason. My parents, on the other hand, will never let me live down the killer poolman of doom incident. This may be apropos of nothing, but I called the police once because there was a guy wandering the mall parking lot across the street from my houses, screaming the F word as loudly as possible, and seemed to be trying to force his way into the mall. I didn't call 911, just police HQ because it wasn't an emergency. 9 cruisers showed up within 5 minutes. Must have been a slow night. I once called the police because there were hundreds of thousands of maggots covering a huge parking lot, and I was convinced there was a body in the nearby dumpster causing the infestation. I might have been drinking a bunch. I'm an EMT and was just listening to the police channel on the radio one night. We hear, "County to district cars, we just had a female caller state there's a black male wearing a hoodie walking down her street. The unit on the road? Okay, what does she want us to do?" Dispatch said, "No idea." My partner and I laughed for a good half hour over that one. My neighbors have reported the following issues to the police. Lawn clippings on their sidewalk. Apparently my dad, who was in the hospital at the time, blew the clippings onto their side. Not having a fence around an above-ground pool and being worried that their 18-year-old kid is going to drown. The yard has a fence around it, but the pool doesn't have any barriers. It complies with local bylaws, though. Also, our dog barking overnight. We don't have a fricking dog, but they do. Our car being parked in our driveway, and they didn't have enough room to erect a non-compliant fence. Their fence partially falling over because it was installed incorrectly. Having a fire in a legal fire pit, and being worried it was going to burn their house down, which is more than 40 feet away. And having our camper parked in the driveway and not being able to see out their window. The only thing they can see out of that window is the outside wall of our house and one tree. I have dumb fricking neighbors. This isn't even the total list, just what I can remember off the top of my head. My dad in the early 80s was medicated as all hell and called the cops to report that his neighbor stole his green herb. LEO dispatcher here. A lady called into 911 to report her baby back ribs stole right off their grill, while another called in to report that a plane was flying low. Do I look like the Federal Air Association or Shane's Ribs? We dispatched and aired lookouts on both. Deputies called into the radio practically crying at 3 a.m. They were laughing so hard when I confirmed the unit for larceny, she wants her baby back ribs over our radio. Worked for the local newspaper and we got to read all of the calls to the cops. The most hilarious one was a woman who called in to report a man driving around in his van, playing loud music and luring kids. When the cops showed up, it was the fudging ice cream man. I wish I was making this up. Some people are just nosy busybodies. Well, to be fair, that's an excellent cover for someone engaging in that particular crime. I think out of all the stupid crap we've been reading, that it at least bears checking out if people use the words luring kids. I got pulled over a year ago for speeding. 10 miles per hour over the legal speed limit, and not 1 or 2 or 3, but 4 cop cars showed up to the, quote, scene. It was in my super suburban hometown, and I'm a 5'1" female, driving a non-tinted window, smaller SUV. I think I can speak for 3 of the cops who were called that it was pretty fricking dumb. Once a lady called us claiming that her neighbor was threatening her. As it turned out, she claimed that her neighbor was plotting an attack against America. How did she figure this out? She had been going up onto his property and looking into her Middle Eastern neighbor's windows and noticed that he had a prayer rug in the middle of the room and said that he worked odd hours. She was given a stern warning about trespassing onto her neighbor's property and told to stop being such a racist idiot. I liked a Facebook page where all calls to police for incidences are posted for the county. The center of my hometown is the crossroads of 2 major state highways, and they've slowly been expanding them. Traffic is super congested in town, and I repeatedly see posts like, "Officer called to intersection of 34 and 47 because light is taking too long to change," or "Officers called to intersection of 34 and 47 because lights have changed but cars remain stopped." Really, people? This construction has been going on for years, but you're still confused? Saw a woman threatening to call the police on the staff of a kebab place in my city because other people, who had ordered before her, were served before her. She then started screaming about how her husband was a lawyer, blah blah, she'll sue, discrimination. She was escorted out by the off-duty cops who were in the place and was seen making a pathetic, groveling apology. Spoiled rich witches, male and female, waste of life and a waste of a good kebab. By the way, on the discrimination thing, this lady was white, drunk, and an idiot. About 12 years ago, I was driving home from a friend's house and I saw an injured raccoon in the middle of the road. It had likely been hit by a car and was unable to move, but it was intact and stood a chance of survival if cared for properly. In a benevolent gesture that was out of character for myself at the time, I called 411 to find out the number for animal control and was told that after midnight, the police took over for animal control. So I called the police and told them there was a hurt raccoon that needed medical attention. In a voice dripping with sarcasm, the dispatcher told me, "Okay, I'll send out an officer to look at the hurt raccoon." I got the message and took it on myself to wrap the raccoon in a shirt and move it onto the grass. It didn't struggle or try to bite. It understood I was trying to help it. In all likelihood, it died on the lawn later that evening, but at least it didn't get run over. That night, I had a dream where a human-sized raccoon fed me amber liquid. I don't recall having ever tasted scotch before, but I instinctively recognized that was what it was that I was drinking. The next day, I bought a bottle of scotch and it was the same flavor from my dream. The bottle was empty by the end of the weekend and I wasn't sober again for years. I was living under a bridge by the end of it. It took me everything to overcome the crushing grip of alcoholism, but I finally got my crap together. This April makes 7 years I've been sober. A woman called 911 at 5 a.m. to report her son wouldn't get up to wash the dishes. She went to jail. Misuse of 911 is a crime in my jurisdiction. One's child not doing the dishes is not a valid use of 911 services. Backstory: we live in a 3-family home, and our landlord had agreed to rent the upstairs apartment to a couple moving from out of state without meeting them. After getting a good reference about them from the man who was hiring one of them to work for him. They were white trash, loud at all hours, severely underweight, with a filthy dog, smoked in the house, they were told not to do this, and even jimmied the washing machine open to steal quarters. The landlord didn't collect these, the washing machine was just on our neighbor's grid, and they were used to reimburse them for the utilities that were used. We shared a common entryway with these garbage people, and my boyfriend left his jacket out there. In the morning, the last few cigarettes from his pack and $2 were missing. He called the landlord to let them know. At this point, our landlord was desperate to get them out and was trying to build a case. So our landlord called the police. An officer had to come over and take a report. We felt kind of silly. In short, our landlord called the cops over $2 and a few cigarettes. IT workers. Who are the most enraging people you have to put up with? I've worked in IT for a few years now and have been messing around with computers of my own and fixing them for friends as far back as I can remember. I understand that not everyone is good with computers. If they were, I wouldn't have a job. I have no problem helping people through things, giving them information, or fixing things. What I do have a problem with is people who mess that crap up and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about when I tell them how to fix it or how I already fixed it. "Oh yeah, your hard drive is completely corrupt. If you listen, you can actually hear it grinding on the inside there. There's nothing I can reasonably do to fix that." "But I need my files." "I'm sorry, the drive is physically broken. I can't recover anything from it." "I thought you were good with computers." "I'm just telling you what I found out." "Well, it wasn't that bad before I bought it to you. You broke it." Frick these people. Someone came into our retail store and asked to buy a windproof router because the wind keeps blowing my Wi-Fi signal away. I'm pretty sure my eyes started bleeding. The person told me, "The game won't run. It's telling me I need to update my graphics drivers if I want to play. What should I do?" Update your graphics card drivers." "Oh, okay, thanks." Telling everyone when they come into work that the internet is down because she can't view one particular website. "The computer forgot my password. No, I swear I've tried it like 30 times and it doesn't work. It keeps saying locked out." I feel like I did most of these when I was a child or in my early teens, so the fact that there are apparently multiple adults, presumably with office, computer-based jobs, who are doing these sorts of things constantly is frankly upsetting. This woman called my college help desk, she was a professor, and told me that her dead brother-in-law was controlling her PC. She also wanted to tell me that she's not crazy. Turns out her batteries were going in her wireless mouse and the cursor was just moving around kinda funny. My 64-year-old colleague said, "I've just had it with this computer. I can't even find the internet." I say, "You're using it right now to see your Gmail." No, this is my Google. I need the internet." And a few people here are saying, well, they're old, and that would be a valid excuse, but this person's position revolved greatly around data entry in a course and program management system for a college. One of our management systems is run off a website called AITA. Knowing how to access the internet is a good idea for that job. The other day, the office manager was trying to send out a message on our mailing list program. She asked, "How do I create a new email?" "Oh, you see at the top there where it says Create Mail?" "Oh, where do I put the email name?" "Oh, look at the top where it says Email Name." "Oh, where do I select which email list to send it to?" "See at the top where it says Email List?" And on and on and on for 20 minutes. The instructions are all right there. I swear half the time these people act like my job is to read things to them. At that point, I start reversing the process and ask them to find it for me. "Can you find a button that looks like it relates to creating an email?" And when they argue, I tell them the true fact that telling someone where something is only reinforces to their brain that they don't need to remember it, whereas finding it for themselves helps them remember. Then they tell me to shut up and tell them where the button is. I wrote a script to do some maintenance on the computers on the network after hours. Clear temporary files, garbage files, defrag, among others. As you know, no one else does this, and I was having to manually do it on a few computers, so I figured I'd script it out and do it to everyone, and get it all done at once over the weekend. Monday morning, all hell breaks loose. Apparently, the number 2 in the office had been storing all of her important files in the recycle bin. Not on the network share like everyone else, but files created on the desktop and then deleted, in which she had opened the recycle bin, undelete, and they'd be back on the desktop. Unfortunately, I had no backups, as the backup procedures I had did not in fact back up the recycle bin on all the computers. I ended up pulling a 50-hour shift redacting and trying to manually put the files back, of which I got about 80% of them despite the defrag. I was in deep crap for about 2 months after that. This was back in 2003 when disk space was more of an issue and multiple desktops had out-of-disk space crashes, in which I manually fixed. I just decided after doing the 4th one to write a script to do the whole network, and yes, I did give notice on the Tuesday before Friday when I executed it. Some people just make silly mistakes. I'm pretty sure I Googled Google before these things never hurt anyone. I once worked for someone who didn't think that IT needed access to network drives to back them up. It's so much more dangerous when you can't do your job. Also, she read some book about lean and IT and only took some weird amalgamation of streamlining software to reduce the number of mouse clicks. So our test scripts literally counted mouse clicks and I had to recode modules because there were too many touches. So instead of making intuitive interfaces, I had to worry about clicks. I wish I were kidding. I had a boss that prided himself on never touching a computer. Web TV was the greatest thing ever, so the company website had to be built around Web TV. They also insisted on having a gosh-awful MIDI file playing on the website. I had to fake takedown notice emails from the RIAA to get him to finally remove it. I never understood how people can take pride in not knowing something. When everything works, why do we even pay you IT guys? And when one thing is broken, why do we even pay you IT guys? Yeah, it seems like a pretty thankless task. Hopefully there are at least a few people who know that when everything is working perfectly, it's actually a sign that IT are doing their jobs wonderfully. I don't get mad at people for not knowing things anymore. That's fine. Really, the things that miff me these days are the following statements. It's not my job to learn how to do that. Oh, I'm computer illiterate. Computers hate me. That kind of thing. Externalizing the problems and not taking ownership of the fact that working with technology is part of your job, and using the "I'm just not a computer person" mantra as an excuse to remain willfully ignorant. I did recently have a user screenshot a problem, paste it into Word, and then fax it to me to open a ticket. That was pretty funny. During a large-scale worm outbreak several years ago, the building one of our guys was working damage control in lost power. It was during a severe thunderstorm. One of our users looked at him, wide-eyed, and shakily asked, Did the virus do that? I rebooted. No, you didn't. Your PC takes 2 minutes to reboot, so you've either lied, logged off and back in, turned the monitor on and off, or did something else. I told you to click Start, version dependent, next step, and then restart. You ignored me and did something else. Cease your lying and/or not listening to me ways. I don't care if you don't want to reboot, it'll fix your problem. Otherwise, I'd tell you not to move so I can see the issue myself. Oh, is this the part where you take over my screen? I don't like it. It's scary, like a ghost. I rarely begrudge someone for not understanding what I do. I'm sure I've said some stupid things about other people's areas of expertise. What I do get irked over is when it's trivialized. I've had a couple of people who barely know me approach me with a big idea that they'd like to get off the ground. One guy wanted to make a World of Warcraft clone, more or less. He knows I write software, but no idea what I do. I work on big data systems and the like. So to him, a programmer is just a programmer. No matter that I know as much about how to make a game like World of Warcraft as I know about brain surgery. But I do know enough to know that one programmer who is not even tangentially related to the end product in expertise is probably not going to get the job done. He had no clue about what making a game like that entailed. I think he figured that Blizzard was run by 4 guys in a garage or something. Another guy had a brilliant idea for a website. Hint, it's a crappy idea. Hilariously crappy. He has no business experience, no development experience, no marketing experience. But he tells me the classic line, I'll give you 5% ownership. Ownership in what? Your pipe dreams? And then I tell him, no thanks, and it's always the same. You have no idea of what you're missing out on. Oh, but I do, and I'm really not missing much. People have no clue about how much work goes into the stuff they use. They figure that since Google is only a logo and a single text box, it should be super duper easy to create that part. I don't need the maps created at first, we just need a search engine, and then we can make one that's better than Google. Once it's running, we'll start working on a new map thing, which is another actual line I've been pitched. Right, because nobody else is trying to do that right now. Search Bing for Google alternatives and let me know what you find. You know, besides irony, the idea guy is the most useless person out there. If all you have is an idea and you're going to pitch it to a developer, save yourself the time and just ask him to say no thanks to you in advance. Anyone who agrees won't be competent. Anyone who's competent won't agree. I've been in IT for longer than I care to admit, but my absolute favorite, well, a coworker came to look over my shoulder while I was working on an application. She looked at my browser and said, "Why does that say Mozilla Firefox?" "Because I'm using the Firefox browser." "Mine doesn't say that." "You may not be using the Firefox browser then." She goes back to her desk and calls me. "It says Internet Explorer." "That's because you're using Internet Explorer." "Make it go away." "What?" "Make it go away." "Make what go away?" I don't want it to say Internet Explorer on my machine, and I don't want it to say Mozilla Firefox on your machine. Make it go away. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I'm not IT, and it wasn't enraging, but my mother called me once from her new iPhone 4S and said, "I can't get the phone to stop playing music. The only reason it stopped is because I've called you. Help me." Press pause, Mum. It was more funny than anything. Did you really just tell me to turn it off and on again? I hope you're making a joke and referencing the IT crowd. Yes, your computer missed the group policy update and you need to log out and back in. Shut up and let me do my job. It's not really something they told me, but the act of washing your hands in pizza grease and then touching every part of my screen. Sweet Lord. Have I accidentally come into a story submission for IT staff at a kindergarten? Because surely there are no adults getting pizza prints all over someone's LCD screen. That's outrageous. Customer, I changed my password and I can't use my computer anymore. So I say, alright, I can probably reset it. Do you know what operating system you're using? Blank stare from the other end. I say, some OSs are easier to reset than others. I need to know what OS you're using. Oh, I'm on the Comcast Internet Pipeline operating system. Awesome. So that's actually your internet provider. When you turn on the computer, what does the screen look like? Blank stare. Does it say Windows 98, Windows ME, Windows XP, Windows 2000, Windows Vista, or Windows 7? Wait. Is it even a Microsoft product you're using, or a Mac? Of course it's not a Mac, silly. I don't have the money for a Mac. So what operating system is it running? Blank stare. Never mind. Just bring your computer in. It's going to be $200. So, I have a printer with a USB cable coming out of it and a USB port on my computer. How do I plug it in? I think a part of me died a little bit when I heard that. It's broken. Why is it that clients are always so vague? Just because you mistyped an email address or didn't plug it in or chose the wrong printer, it doesn't mean your computer is broken. People assume that we know how to program websites and iPhone apps because we know how to set up telco or replace your hard drive. Nothing happens when I click the link. Nothing happens is client speak for, the thing I expect to happen doesn't happen. If someone tells me they click a button and nothing happens, the one thing I can absolutely guarantee is that something does happen, something interesting and diagnostically important, which the client refuses to put into any other words than nothing happens. Maybe they get an error message, maybe they get a white screen, maybe an Ajax loading GIF appears, but hangs there forever. Maybe the browser crashes altogether. Maybe the whole computer crashes, catches fire, and quickly spreads, killing the client's newborn infant. The client will still describe this as, "I tried, but nothing happened." Ugh, what do you even do here then? When I told her I had to wait for the vendor to contact me back after they looked at the issue, I calmly said, "I make sure you can do your job," and then I just walked out of her office. Most EUs have no idea their programs are from a specific vendor who is the go-to source when stuff hits the fan, like today. You can't win, really. Every once in a while you have these small victories. Someone has a problem, you remote into their workstation, it's something easy, you click through a few menus quickly, and some screens which look impressive because of all the numbers and tech jargon, and then presto, they think you're a hero. But most of this job is waiting. Waiting for when you're needed if you don't have anything else which needs to be done, or you're in a panic when things go wrong. It's extremely stressful. It's either, why are we paying him if all he seems to do is sit around, or why are we paying him if these things go down? You're damned if you do, and damned if you don't. What version of Windows do you have? XP? 7? 8.1? Internet Explorer 10. Most times when someone sees me doing something in the command prompt or terminal for any reason, apparently I'm hacking. No, I'm not hacking, I'm updating my software. No, I'm not hacking, I'm talking on IRC. Friend going to college for computer science and needed a new laptop. We were having a conversation about what to download first. I said, you should probably get something like Chrome or something similar as the very first thing. I use Internet Explorer, I don't like those other ones, they give you viruses. She got a virus within a week on her brand new laptop. Going to college for computer sciences. I couldn't facepalm hard enough. Are you in Windows 7? XP? I don't know, I'm not a computer expert. Are you an expert in being a total moron then? My memory stick comes up as FAT32. Does that mean I've got too much stuff on it? Is it saying it's too fat? True fricking story. No way. The narrator refuses to believe that this one is true. I can't exist on a planet where someone believes that the IT pioneers of the world decided to indicate a drive has reached capacity by fat-shaming it. I don't want to be in the same species that has this. Those that hover over my shoulder asking questions that only slow me down. What's that? Why do you do that? How does that work? What are you doing? Honestly, I don't even mind being asked questions 99% of the time. What irks me are the people that have 50 million irrelevant questions that actually slow down my progress and interrupt my train of thought. If you want me to train you on how to do my job, you're getting an invoice that has a line item for X hours of training at $1,500 an hour. Then there's those people that used to be in IT years ago and somehow feel that makes them the experts. You were in IT. You've been out for 20 years. I've been doing this for the past 15 years. I'm the damn expert. Quit telling me how to do my job. You're wrong. Sit down and let me get you back to doing what you are the expert at now, which is not IT. I could do your job. Good, so I can go back to doing something useful and you'll take care of your own problems from now on. I find things other so-called techies say are more enraging. However, a few years ago, I had a client that wanted her PC cleaned up. In the end, I installed MSE and MBAM and configured it. A few months later, I got an email from her. She says she might have a virus and for me to check into it. I remote in and see that MSE is gone and Symantec AV is installed. I ask why she removed MSE and brought Symantec. She started her answer with, well, I felt, and I just stopped listening to her feelings reason. Soldiered on, fixed her problem, and sent her a bill. In short, some people don't think they get a good product unless they pay for it. I've seen this in different areas of business. I work in a call center. Outside of work, I'm as IT as you can get, fixing computers and whatnot. My day job is dealing with calls about people's accounts at a credit union. I enjoy it for the most part, aside from the fact that we have to tell our members about services that we offer, and we have to refer 10% of our calls. So this one girl calls, I check the date of birth and she's 19, calling for her balance. The first thing I do is ask if she uses our online banking, as I get a referral and she's young enough not to use the excuse of not knowing how. She responds, no, well, I don't know. I mean, I look at my balances on my phone, but I never go online. Frustration intensifies. When I sit down at a user's machine to put my talent and years of training and experience to work, and they say, when you're done playing with it, let me know so I can get some real work done. On a computer that they need to do their job, that they screwed up with their quest for pretty wallpapers or cute animated mouse pointers or great deals on vacations or fortunes from Nigerian princes or whatever. Ugh, there are so many annoying things that users do. Emailing simply with, my insert device or software is broken. Please try to elaborate, explain what you're doing and what happens. It's a complete waste of my time to have to probe you for information like you're 15 years old. On the same vein, they complain that the problem hasn't been resolved, but they never responded to your attempts to get more information. They'll walk into my office, stand there for 5 minutes while I'm on the phone with someone else because they just couldn't wait and their problem is incredibly important. It's a distraction to the problem I'm working on and unfair to all the other users who submitted their questions and issues correctly. 9 out of 10 times, it's not an emergent issue that needs my attention immediately. There's times where the company board say, sorry, we don't have any money to spend on that. And we really need to replace machines that are broken beyond repair. Meanwhile, they have enough money to buy water columns for the waiting room that bubble up constantly. It's to the point that I'm telling people to complain to the doctors on the board. Constant due date for projects that just aren't possible. Opening multiple new offices at the same time for a 3-person department, while also still being responsible for other projects and daily help desk support. They demo new software that clearly won't work, then buy it and tell us to make it work. They get upset when we can't deliver that or it takes a while. I just had a user come into my office to ask me to order her a new headset for her phone. I told her she'd need to speak to finance, but while discussing it, she explained further. People she's on the phone with constantly can't hear her, and she ends up yelling so they can. I tell her, "Why don't you bring it here first and see if we can't fix it?" She gets the headset and I'm able to determine it's the voice tube. In the end, it's solved, no extra money spent. I don't understand why she wouldn't just let me know she was having an issue. I constantly have users that won't call or email to let us know about their issues. They'll do one of two things. Wait until I happen to be at their locations, which I've only left enough time for the issue that I came for, or they wait until it's thoroughly upset them and then send me an email with expletives complaining about the issue. They do not explain the problem, just complain. As an IT person, I can understand that not everyone has levels of knowledge about electronics that I do. When I've explained the simple things to you multiple times, that's when I get upset. I shouldn't have to show you how to attach something to your email every single time you do it. Either take a note or Google it at that point. I'm not your personal IT professional, I support an entire company of people who have issues. Yes, your simple thing comes across as a waste of my time. What product self-destructed the first time you used it? $5 shades. Bent over to pick up a quarter that I'd dropped, glasses fell down off of my shirt. Plastic cracked, lenses popped out. That was a $5 quarter that I picked up. A baseball bat. Not kidding. First throw, first hit, and snap. An oven timer. We did a minute test just to see how loud it was. The hammer inside shook the timer so hard, springs and screws started falling out. Like straight out of a Tom and Jerry episode, the amount of crap that fell out of this thing. It stopped ringing when it finally broke itself. Now we have an electronic oven timer. There's less shaking. A can opener from the dollar store. I paid $1 and got $0 value from it. I also had a hell of a time opening a can of beans. I had a candy floss maker when I was younger. It lasted a day. My brother received one of those Air Hogs remote control airplanes for Christmas. The very first flight it went out of range from the remote and just kept going into the horizon. We searched for it but never found it. At the time, it was devastating for him. My family didn't have a lot of money, so we couldn't get much for Christmas. That was pretty much his only gift that year, and my parents couldn't afford to replace it. They're in a better place financially now, so it's a funny Christmas story we tell every year. The cookie tongs at my old work. We had a raggedy box for cookies with a broken lid and no spare tongs to grab them. We had to waste plastic gloves every time a customer wanted cookies. It wasn't that big a deal, but we got a lot of complaints about it for some reason. Like 30% of our Google reviews were about the frickin' cookie box and how we got them out. So the company finally gave us a nice new glass display case and a set of tongs to appease the masses. The first time I used them, they snapped in two. I've never seen someone as heartbroken from some plastic from the dollar store as my manager that day. Apparently, the dollar stores in the States are way worse than they've been in any country I've ever lived in. I feel like the stuff the rest of us can get is garbage and short-lived, but doesn't literally fall apart the second it's used for its intended purpose. It was the year 2000. I wanted a Skip-It toy really badly, but I grew up super poor. Got a generic one from my parents one day. I put it on, rotated it once, and then shot-put-launched the counterball across the driveway. Could not repair. Immediately in the recycling bin. Black & Decker once sold an electric under-cabinet can opener that worked only once. As we were throwing it out, I looked up online reviews and found that every review said the same thing. It worked once and then never again. It was a can opener, not a cans opener. My printer. I'm not buying a Canon printer for the third time. I should have just learned my lesson the second time. My brother and I got Stretch Armstrong for Christmas one year in the late 1970s. We lived in Syracuse, New York, and my parents would hide the presents in the attic. The attic wasn't well insulated, and Syracuse gets very cold in the winter. When we opened Stretch on Christmas morning, he was as hard as a rock. Easy now. My dad told us not to stretch him until he warmed up. As soon as my dad left the room, my brother and I decided he was warm enough. Nope. We immediately broke Stretch's leg off. There was some weird gel inside. Sorry, Stretch, we hardly knew ya. A $70 pair of Wolford nylons. I brought the right size. I even double-checked with the sales associate. We took them out of the package, and as soon as I went to put them on, they basically disintegrated. Oof. A Johnny. I started my love life off the right way, with a teen pregnancy scare. A crappy bra. Literally had it on for not even an hour and the underwire popped out and stabbed me in the chest. Stupid underwire. I brought an old rifle called an SKS. It was covered in preservative grease. I went home and disassembled it to clean it, and disassembled everything. Well, there's a lot of springs under tension in that rifle. It's amazingly complicated internally for what seems to be a simple weapon. I turned a little lever to see if I could get a part out, and it launched a spring deep into my backyard, and I never saw it again. My Digimon Greymon toy that I bought in a stand during the monthly fair. It broke my heart, and I've never brought anything else from that fair. My friend's wire saw to cut some campfire wood. His response to it breaking? Well, I guess that's why it was only $5. I bought a high-quality coffee grinder, Burr, with good coarseness controls, and the first time I turned it on, the timer handle broke and it started grinding forever. I still use that grinder, but now I have to plug it in to turn it on and unplug it to turn it off. The grinds are great at many sizes, coarse for cold brew and V60 and Chemex, and also very fine for AeroPress. It's just annoying that the switch broke. I saved up for months to buy Skate for Xbox 360, finally got it, and after putting the disc in, my console got knocked over and screwed the disc up. I never got past the menu, and I had to wait 3 months to buy it again because my parents refused to help me pay for it. This charging case for my phone. The one thing you shouldn't do is remove it vertically. I did exactly that. The dollar store version of a ball and paddle. Stupid elastic came off the board that was held together by a normal staple. I brought a really cool kind of military-looking jacket from Forever 21. When I got home and took it out of the bag, a button fell off. Later that night, I wore it out, and over the course of the evening, every single button came off. Never shopped at Forever 21 again. I mean, on cheap clothing, you should reinforce the threads on buttons. You just grab a sewing needle and some thread and go over it once or twice. It can be the difference between garbage and not garbage. Although cheap, fast fashion stores are hit and miss with quality. I brought a Forever 21 shirt that lasted 3 washes, another I've had for 6 years without any holes or rips. The tremolo bar from my first electric guitar, a Squier Strat. I inserted it slightly misaligned into the screw rail, and when I screwed it in, it literally melted from the torsion strength, broke apart, sealed the hole, and left the bridge pulled upwards. In consequence, the strings floated half an inch from the bridge. I didn't tell my parents because it was my sweet 16th gift, and they both seemed so happy when they gave it to me. Nowadays, I realized the repair would have been $30 tops. I still used the heck out of it though. It gained some massive tone and would occasionally detune, but I loved it despite that. On the flip side, my fingers became hella strong due to the added pressure, and whenever I used my friends' guitars, I felt like Piccolo or Rock Lee when they dropped the heavy clothes. Their strings felt like butter. 3 out of the 4 Razer products I've ever owned. PC gaming equipment. A 4x4 Rubik's Cube. An expensive nutcracker soldier given as a Christmas gift. I put the nuts in its mouth, worked the lever, and his jaw broke. Were you putting the right sort of nuts in the toy's mouth? Sorry, that was a low-hanging fruit. Pun intended. But for real, this led the narrator to find out that the toys called nutcrackers aren't actually made to crack nuts. They're just called that. Fascinating. Can opener. Went through 4 in 2 days. Ended up just borrowing my mum's. Never gave it back because it's the only one I've owned that's lasted. Damn thing is older than me. The tent I won for selling $800 worth of Boy Scout popcorn? It broke while I was setting it up in my parents' backyard. Never sold again. Not because the rewards sucked, but because the popcorn was so terrible and overpriced that I felt guilty about it. I would have preferred to just straight up ask people for donations. The tax write-off would have been worth more than that fricking popcorn. A cheap dollar store frisbee. I threw it to the dogs exactly 1 time. They returned from the other side of the backyard with it in 5 pieces. A cast iron skillet. First time preheating it on the stove, it cracked clean in half. It was very loud and nearly scared the life out of me. 9 years later, I still have the replacement pan Freddy's gave me. One time I sort of got into Rubik's Cubes and I decided to buy one from eBay. It was really cheap, something like $2. I didn't even notice until a few hours later that the delivery was from Hong Kong and that it would take about a month to arrive. Didn't really bother finding a different one. 1 month later, my interest in them had died off. I didn't even remember about the order until it arrived. A whole month for delivery, and it fell apart as soon as I tried to use it. I hate to reinforce the stereotype that things made in China have bad quality, especially because I am Chinese, and to be fair, it was really cheap, but I mean, yeah. I bought my 16-year-old son a used car as a birthday gift. I was 20 miles away from the dealership and I put down the sun visor. The plastic visor holder clip broke in two. I would have enjoyed this way more if the car had broken. You wouldn't have. That would have just been the price of comedy. Oh, what broke for me, you ask? Oh, nothing. Just my heart. They don't make wooden bats like they used to. I bought one a year ago. It cracked on the very first pitch. I have a George Brett baseball from my childhood that I could probably chop down a tree with. A compact digital camera I got for my parents for Christmas in 2006. After opening gifts, I turned on the camera and was looking at it and wanted to go downstairs to my room. I tripped down some stairs, dropped it, and the lens smashed. Those goddamn sponge mops. I almost always end up breaking it just trying to get the plastic wrap off. So technically, before I used it. The first winter I owned a car in South Dakota, I bought an ice scraper which immediately snapped the first time I went to use it. I ended up holding it by the blade end and doing it that way for a longer time than I care to admit. I won a decently nice Shakespeare fishing rod and reel set in a raffle at work. I had it for a few months, unused, until I got the opportunity to go to a barbecue someplace that had a dock on the river. I was going to fish with my new rod, finally! I got it all set up, hook tied on and baited, a weight and a floater, and I got to cast for the very first time, and mid-cast, the screw holding the reel onto the rod unscrewed. I guess I didn't notice it was super loose. And with my cast, the reel flips off into the river. I was pretty devastated. I even offered some kids swimming like $20 if they could find it, but the water was too deep and murky, and it was never seen again. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My brand new wireless mouse. I broke the dongle by dropping my laptop squarely onto it. My brand new Range Rover. Test drove it, bought it, got handed the keys, then could not get it to start. The mechanic comes out and gets it to start, saying I wasn't stepping on the brake hard enough. Fast forward to 10 days later, it doesn't start. Towed to the dealer for service on July 29th. Still at the dealer to this day. A veggie spiralizer from Pampered Chef. One of those 30cm rulers that you fold in half. Year 8 rolled around, I still had my Y7 one and it snapped. Whatever, it was a little worn, I wasn't angry. I got a brand new shiny one. Took it out of its packaging, put it in my pencil case, took it out, only for it to fricking snap immediately the very first time I unfolded it. I was fricking annoyed. It was a crappy £2 ruler, and that's like £200 in kid money. A screwdriver from the dollar store. I needed it to put some furniture together, but it broke halfway through screwing in the first 2 screws. I wound up using a different screwdriver for the remaining screws. It turned out that the bookcase I was building needed nails hammered into the back, but I didn't have a hammer. I wound up using the handle of the screwdriver to bash the nails into the back. I once got an assortment of fancy teas as a gift. They came with a glass infuser. It looked like a test tube with slits in it to let the water through. I used it once and discovered that while it was easy to put the dry tea leaves in, there was no easy way to get the used ones out. I've got a mesh tea ball with a hinge on it now. Yeah, that seems needlessly finicky. The things some people will go through just to have something that's prettier or fancier looking. My first Android smartphone. Went out to play Pogo and dropped it. Without any protection, as I'd ordered that online the same day. I wanted to die. A bamboo bath tray. I tested it out with my book and my wine in bed a few times to make sure it was sturdy. After the dry run, I used it in the bath. It worked until I picked it up to put it away. Literally fell apart in my hands. My boss's jet ski. I got invited to a party at his place. He had a decently sized pond on his land. People were taking turns on the jet ski, so I decided to give it a go. I made one turn on it and it flooded, so I had to drag it back to the dock, having no clue what happened to it, while fearing that I'd broken it completely. I bought a cheap tripod off Amazon and the handle snapped right off the first time I went to turn the camera. Broke before we even used it. My mum and I were coming home from a trip to IKEA. We got a couple of things, one of them being a white colander to drain things in. We pulled into the driveway and started unloading all of the crap. Before we could even get in the door, I dropped the colander and it hit the concrete just right to where the paint on the bottom edge chipped completely off and totally dented the bottom. We still use it to this day, even though the bottom is a little rusted by now where the coating chipped off, but the food never touches that part. It's a joke between my mum and I. My $2,100 laptop. Sent it back 3 times during my freshman year of college, and finally got a new motherboard. Dell customer service has a disgusting amount of room for improvement. A foldable Ninja Star I bought from a gas station 15 years ago. I spent half my paycheck on that. Piece of crap. I got this RC car for Christmas one year, and for some reason I thought it would work in water like a boat. It didn't. It broke. I got my braces fixed once. I broke them while eating less than an hour later. A laptop I purchased. I got a laptop and brought it home to install everything and install the programs I needed for school, just to find out the disk drive didn't work. So I went back and returned it and got another one, got back into my car and drove home to open the laptop to discover all of the keys on the keyboard were in the wrong spots and they didn't type the same letters as a standard keyboard. So I turned around, got back in my car and drove back to the store. Got my third laptop, checked it in the store to make sure it was all correct, and that one worked great. My Gillette Fusion blades. It was the first time I tried shaving and had one heck of a beard. The blade broke before my beard did. Also, my barber would rather avoid shaving my beard with a shaving machine as it's not capable of entirely removing the hair. He'd much rather burn it. These days, I shave with a safety razor and that seems to do the trick. A stupid, cheap ice cream scoop with one of those wiper blades. Screw that piece of junk. I'm going to buy a deluxe scoop with no moving parts and is all one solid piece. I bought a Kindle. I connected it to my computer, put it down on the stool next to my desk, about a foot off the ground, and while turning, I hit it with my leg and it slipped off the desk and the screen shattered. The kind where the colors bleed all over, but clearly it's still turning on and off. I debated bringing it to the store and claiming that I unpacked it like that, since only about half an hour had passed, but ultimately I felt like the lie was too big. I read books on my phone now. I've been dipping since I was 13. I tried to switch to a vape last year. I didn't know what I was getting into, so I thought $60 was a decent price for my first vape. It broke in the first week. Copenhagen Mint is my favorite. Windows 10. I mean, how can you break it when it's broken to begin with? My friend bought an umbrella from a stand on the street, and as she was opening it, the top part just flew off as she stared open-mouthed for several seconds. That happened a couple of years ago, and I'm still laughing. I used a brand new Spalding basketball pump on my brand new Spalding basketball. Popped instantly. I would pay to be a fly on the wall watching that kid's heartbroken look, because as devastating as it would be when it happens to you at that age, you got to admit it's kind of funny watching that level of heartbreak on a kid. Not so much the thing breaking, but when I was 12 I got my first pogo stick. I decided to test it out on the nice, level pavement of our driveway. 1 bounce, 2 bounce, 3 bounce, tipped over sideways and shattered my elbow in 3 places. In other words, the pogo broke me. The earbuds I just bought. Good day. A camping lantern. Broke the very first night. We spent the rest of the trip using glow sticks and an Eddie Bauer wallet light. As some background, I went camping with my best friend's family when we were kids. They bought about half the camping gear at Big Lots and included the lantern. It broke immediately and we spent the rest of the trip without consistent light. We used several glow sticks and a little wallet light. One of those credit card slim LED things when we actually needed light. They never went camping again. A pretty Christmas tree ornament. I hung it up to take a picture and it slipped off the branch and shattered. Any prize I ever won from an arcade. My laptop. I just took it home from the store and was on the couch setting it up while my 2 older brothers were wrestling, and they managed to fall on it and snap it in half. They always bullied me, like most older brothers do, and they had to split the cost of a new one. It was one of the best days of my life. Runcam HD 2. A nice, inexpensive GoPro alternative? Nope. Utter garbage. And Runcam stands behind literally nothing. Died after recording 15 minutes of testing, and the cat. Call your retailer, we have no interest in helping you. 3 times was enough, but even at $89, it's not an affordable alternative to anything. A $1 knife from Walmart. I took it out of the blister pack and it completely fell apart in my hand. I bought a house during a hurricane. The roof leaked the first night we slept there. A $2,000 drone. It was 3 feet above the ground and about 6 feet away from me with low battery after flying around for a bit. I knew it was low battery, so I brought it down while it was counting down to return home. Yeah, I didn't know that it actually shoots straight up to the altitude before returning to me. Straight up into a tree. Busted. An overpriced coffee machine that takes a little plastic pod. It never worked, never bought one again, never drank coffee again. It was not meant to be. A handy stitch, one of those as seen on TV small handheld sewing machines. Seemed like such a great idea, and it broke the first time I tried it out. Got a fancy juicer for my birthday one year. Immediately threw the only fruit I had into it, peaches. Goodbye, fancy juicer. A fog machine. It worked for like a whole minute and then just shut off. About 20 minutes later, it was still plugged in, it spotted out a tiny bit of fog and finally just stopped working. I bought a pack of AA batteries from this discount chain called Grocery Outlet. Took them home, popped them in my Discman, yeah, it was a while ago, and it played the first 8 seconds of the first song and then died. I mean, I guess technically they didn't break, but Jesus. What's the best troll you've pranked somebody with? I convinced a roommate that Microsoft was coming after him for piracy and that he needed to go down to the courthouse to meet their lawyer for a settlement. In high school, I posted on my wall, "Wow, Facebook automatically censors your password when you post it onto Facebook." Then a bunch of asterisks to indicate that I'd typed in my password and it had censored it. Try it out for yourself. I got 3 passwords that day. I convinced my roommate that he had herpes by stealing his phone and changing my name in his contacts to a girl he had a fling with a few months ago. A little bit of backstory concerning the girl. After he stopped talking to her, she got pregnant and everyone would attack him saying it was his, but he refused to talk to her. So I went ahead and texted him the following. "Listen, I know we haven't talked in a while and I'm sure you know I'm pregnant. I just wanted to ease your mind and let you know that you're not the father. But during my doctor's visit, they told me I tested positive for herpes downstairs. You should get tested. Bye." He started freaking out, and when the guys and I told him it was a prank, he threw his new iPhone against the wall, completely destroying the thing. He then proceeded to storm out of the house, get in his car, and disappeared for about 5 hours. Oh, and this went down on April Fool's Day. By far the best prank me or any of my friends have witnessed. Pal, if you see this, way to be a good sport. I said that the Rickroll subreddit was a sad sub to visit, except I actually hid a link to a Rickroll in the link. Thousands of people got Rickrolled that day. It feels good, man. Not me, my dad. He's entirely convinced my grandmother that the word dinosaur is pronounced dinosaur instead of dinosaur. It's extremely subtle and not really that incorrect, which is why, 1, it was really easy to convince her, and 2, it's been 5 years and she still says it like that. He does this with a new word every year or so. That's simultaneously such a low-level troll, but it still seems so damn mean. Maybe because it's setting up a woman of undisclosed but presumably advanced age for some kind of slightly embarrassing social encounter where she might be too old to unlearn the habit? When the DayZ mod first came out, me and my friends played on a server that was set so that you spawned with nothing but a bandage and had reduced loot spawns in buildings, which made it quite hard for new players to get started. So we'd fly up and down the coast, picking up new players and offering to kit them out, and now in DayZ even a basic pistol is lethal in the right hands. So we'd tell them we're dropping them off at our base, which had some supplies in a crate, which they could load up on and then leave. However, the room they were dropped off into had only a crate filled with empty tin cans and water bottles inside. In order to get out, the player had to answer trivia questions, and an incorrect answer would result in us building another section of wall in the room. 3 wrong answers would result in the final section being placed inside the player, generally crushing them, as the player model would just randomly start breaking bones on the walls as they couldn't move anymore. If they answered right or did something funny, like one guy who was asked to sing a song and began singing Blink-182 songs, they were released outside to find a backpack with food and water and a suppressed M9 and a briefcase full of gold. Most people were pretty good sports about it. My friend convinced me that the past tense of mine was moaned. He also convinced our other friend that the past tense of blind was blound. I worked at Subway and had some trainees, one of whom was just dumb. Nice girl, but dumber than a bag of soup. One day, the toaster oven broke. I'm not sure why, but when she asked, I just said the flux capacitor was broken. She probably told at least 10 customers this before someone else told her. We all had a good laugh about it. Oh my god, I managed to convince a girl in 8th grade that it was impossible for water to exist in a liquid state. Yes, you heard that correctly. About 8 years ago, all Facebook events had attending, maybe, and not attending buttons, and it would show how many people fell into each category. Also at that time, people weren't very good at keeping their events private. I created a Facebook group that eventually amassed about 500 fellow trolls. Every day I'd search on Facebook for party or reception or whatever, and I'd find a private event that was accidentally made public. I'd then send the link to everyone in the group, and we'd all go to the page and click Not Attending. So some kid would be having a birthday party, they invited their entire class, and Facebook would show that 20 people would be attending, 5 people were maybes, and 500 would not be attending. I tricked the whole of Reddit into believing I was a National Geographic photographer doing an Ask Me Anything. It ended up on the front page. I convinced my wife, who never watches game shows, that contestants on Jeopardy have to pay back their debts if they have a negative balance at the end of the game. Well, that's why it's called Jeopardy, right? It's just live TV gambling. It wouldn't be very tense if you didn't have the chance of losing and weren't putting anything on the line. That's why it's such a durable and popular format compared to those other wussy game shows, where all you can do is win. When she said she was going to look it up, I said, sure, go ahead, you'll find confirmations, but the show likes to keep it quiet because some puritanical sorts take it amiss. She went around telling people about this for quite a while before she got gently corrected by her brother. Apparently people didn't want to embarrass her because she was so enthusiastic about it. Yes, I'm a horrible, horrible person. When I was a kid, I successfully convinced my brother's friend that our rabbit was a British kitten. When I told him later that I was just kidding and it was actually a rabbit, he didn't believe me. I'm a submariner in the US Navy. For a dare, I convinced a college-educated girl that I'd hooked up with a few times that she could send me care packages while I was underway. It had to contain items that wouldn't perish, like beef jerky, nuts, or candy, and had to be waterproof. How would it get delivered, you ask? Well, the US Navy has a contract with most aquariums on the coast that deliver packages by whale. It's called US Whale Mail. You package your stuff, you waterproof it, label it with the ship I'm on with my name, and you take it to the aquarium. They attach a group of packages to said whale, which then swims across the world and, quote, hones in on our sonar signal. Our sonar operators hear the whale and go, oh, the mail's here, and we surface the ship to detach our packages and enjoy our semi-fresh beef jerky. This girl stopped emailing me a few weeks into my next deployment. I like to imagine the look on the face of the aquarium employee who possibly had to receive the package. I have no idea if she actually did it. She bought it fully while I was there, though. In short, I convinced a girl whales delivered packages to US Navy submarines. That's admittedly a pretty funny way of talking yourself out of ever sleeping with that person ever again. I hope the laugh was worth it. Honestly, I wouldn't have been able to keep a straight face if I was in the room for that lie. During a raid in World of Warcraft, I set up a keybind to only speak with one person. Over the course of 2 hours, I'd periodically whisper the word for the male reproductive organ in a gravelly tone. After saying this several times, the person finally shouts back the word at me a bunch of times, followed by, "We can all hear you." Mind you, there were 38 other people in the group who had no idea what he was talking about. It went completely dead silent, and then someone asked, "What the hell are you talking about?" We spent the next 15 minutes laughing and trying to explain to him what had occurred. This was 2 years ago, and we still tease him about it. I also trolled my oldest child, 13. One night, several hours after he was supposed to be asleep, I noticed a light under his door, so I opened it to check on him. He was sitting on his bed frantic and completely freaked out. I asked him what was going on, and he said, "I was watching adult flicks, and all of a sudden the FBI said they're watching me." I'm trying very hard to keep a straight face as he's telling me this big story about how he has to pay a fee to the FBI or they'd come arrest him. I told him to go to sleep and I'd take care of it. The next morning, I explained to him that I'd spoken to someone from the FBI and they were going to let it go since he's a minor and didn't know any better, but under very specific conditions. Conditions being probation, more or less. He was to be on his best behavior with school and home life, assist with anything that was needed, and after a month, if there was no negative report from his parents, he'd be free and clear. I generally have a very good kid, but for that month, I literally didn't have to do anything around the house. It was wonderful. Once I convinced a girl that the only reason I had good grades is that I had a degenerative disease where the arteries supplying blood to my brain would steadily shrink, and I had to take a medicine every 12 hours so that they didn't close completely. Before the tests, I'd take a double dose, flooding my brain with oxygen and making me very smart. I convinced my mum that narwhals didn't exist. I once told a girl I worked with that someone had sneaked into the building we worked in and painted "Gullible" on the ceiling in bright orange paint. She looked up and said, "There's nothing there." I also looked up and said, "They must have got maintenance to paint over it." She replied, "Oh, that makes sense. They wouldn't want to leave it there." The year was 1999. In the 5th grade, I sent an automated message from ICQ to some girl in my grade advising that everyone needed to sign off within the next 5 minutes or else their ICQ account would be deleted. The message ended advising them to pass the message along verbatim. I then sat back and watched as classmate after classmate went offline. I was so proud of myself until a crush of mine told me she has to log off or else ICQ would delete her account. I play CS:GO. Every game I pretend to be a completely brain-dead Russian, which sometimes tilts my opponents off the face of the planet. It's quite a skill. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Back when The Creatures were pretty popular in comparison to how they are now on YouTube, like in 2011-2012, they had this public Minecraft server. They had this YouTube video of being on this server, and they would use commands in the chat to have the server broadcast messages by simply putting /broadcast before their message in chat. I can't believe no one had thought of it before, or that this command was disabled for non-admins. But I used the command to broadcast some really dirty things in chat, like racism, some pretty vulgar, racy stuff, anything edgy that a 14-year-old with power would say, all while making it seem like it was the Creatures doing it. Z and Dans were in at the time and panicking to keep the rampant chat calm. Soon, more and more randoms were learning that somebody was using the /broadcast command and began doing it themselves. The server was in chaos and went down for a few days. There was a guy on World of Warcraft who wouldn't stop coming on to me after he heard my voice in the guild chat, so I got my revenge by telling him about the rare mount the level 3 to 4 kobolds in Fargadeep Mine in Elwyn Forests have a small chance of dropping. He farmed that sucker for days before giving up. I ate 2 goats and a sheep and still managed to get them to pay the toll to cross my bridge. Back in the early days of AOL chat rooms, I used to chat up my 2 teenaged stepsons and get them to ask me out. They thought that I was their age and from their town. As they grew more and more excited by the prospect of hooking up, I'd start making comments about them that I couldn't possibly have known if I were truly a stranger. I used to love watching the moment they realized who I was and typed, "F you, Mom." We laugh about it now. Wait, this implies that this happened more than once. My lord, if that occurred even a single time, it would be enough to scare me off the internet forever. I once convinced my very high sister that we had been sitting in silence for the past half hour and in fact we had been chatting. I got her to think that she had imagined the entire thing. That's what she gets for eating the last of the ice cream. Okay, a bit of backstory. Several years ago, a program came out called Comipo, which let you create comics using preset characters that you could modify, add text and add special effects to, and so on. The thing was, it was extremely limited in what it let you do. For example, you couldn't actually create custom poses for your characters. You had to pick a pose from a list of presets, and if there wasn't a pose for what you wanted, tough luck. But the biggest kick in the butt with the program was that it launched in English with version 1.0, while the original Japanese version was on version 1.5 or whatever. The Japanese version had several updates with new, free content, bug fixes, and additional features like 3D object importing, but us English users were left out in the cold. It would be months before we'd start seeing updates, and it wasn't even until years later that we actually had the same version as the Japanese users did. Heck, there was even paid DLC costumes for the Japanese version that they wouldn't even sell to us without several months' delay. So, in short, the program sucked and the people running it sucked even harder. Well, the program was published at the time in English by Crunchyroll. It's since changed hands. Crunchyroll is the official anime streaming site, and they had a big advertising campaign to try and get people to buy Comipo. Of course, this made them very aggressive about deleting negative criticism of Comipo from their forums and the official Comipo Facebook account, which only made the dissatisfied users, myself included, more angry. And then Crunchyroll announced a contest. Entrants had to create a short 10-page comic using Comipo. All winners would receive free premium items, which we assumed was the first DLC costume pack. And the grand prize winner would also get their comic translated to Japanese and posted on the Japanese Comipo website. I knew what I had to do. I had to win this contest. Not for the prizes. Oh no, I didn't really care about the prizes at all. I just wanted to embarrass the ever-loving crap out of Comipo and Crunchyroll, and I knew just how to do it. So on to the troll. I created the most generic, pandering bullcrap comic I could possibly come up with. I studied past winners of the contest run by Crunchyroll, including previous Comipo contests, and I molded a comic out of the most blatantly pandering, generic anime moblob crap that I could possibly come up with. A comic that was, for all intents and purposes, terrible, but what would be exactly what I needed to claim victory. Of course, the comic included a healthy dose of butt-kissing to the Comipo software itself for extra points. The result of this effort was Twin Tail, an 8-page harem romance manga about two twin-tailed twins who wanted to do the deed with the generic manga protagonist. I released Twin Tail to the public via Crunchyroll's official submission forum, and then I waited. After a few weeks, the winners were decided, and what do you know, I won second place. But perhaps you're wondering, what's so funny? Where's the troll? What exactly did I do to Crunchyroll and Comipo? Well, after I received the key for my prize DLC, which didn't even work at first and then turned out to be something they were charging $15 for, that was originally released for the Japanese version for free, then I revealed my terrible secret to the world. The images in Twin Tail are GIF files, and if you wait 4 minutes on a given page, the entire page changes, revealing new dialogue that completely craps on Comipo and Crunchyroll. The angry masses of dissatisfied Comipo owners pretty much declared me a god of trolling after that. I managed to successfully get a fairly large company to declare an entry to their contest, the winner, one that secretly insulted them and their entire fanbase. Within a day, my Crunchyroll account was banned. I was IP banned from making new accounts, although I easily got around it and continued to make new accounts to mock them over the next few days, and the official Comipo Facebook account blocked me and nuked all of the posts of mine they'd ever reposted. My comic was removed from the gallery, mentions of the comic were removed from the contest thread, and anyone who mentioned the incident had their posts deleted from the Crunchyroll forums and their Facebook page. In short, successfully tricked the developers and publishers of a crappy comic-making program into declaring my entry into one of their contests the winner, while secretly insulting them via a comic that changed to say something else if you waited long enough. In retaliation, they banned me and banned all discussion of anything I'd ever posted. Haha, excellent stealth takedown. You can tell that they weren't even taking the submission seriously if they weren't even hovering on any given page for longer than 4 minutes. Way to call them out on it. I convinced my high school girlfriend that the trailblazer was an actual animal that Lewis and Clark discovered on their journey through Oregon. We were at a Portland Trailblazers basketball game for a date, and she kept commenting on how annoyed she was by the mascot. "Ugh, what is that thing? Ugh, what's it doing?" I said, totally straight-faced, "It's a trailblazer. You never read about it?" "Oh yeah, well, they're extinct now. But when Lewis and Clark were traveling through what we now know as Portland, they actually happened upon it. Anthropologists believe it was something of a wolf-bear hybrid adapted to the wet climate here, and some have speculated that there may be one or two surviving that actually account for Bigfoot sightings." So she didn't buy it right away, but I kept at it pretty convincingly, and after about 5 minutes, she completely accepted it as fact. Fast forward 6 months, we're at a party with a bunch of our friends, and the Portland Trailblazers come up in conversation. She decides to share this fascinating and little-known fact. Everyone looks at me as she's sharing all of this complete nonsense, basically verbatim from what I told her, and we all just die laughing. A breakup ensued shortly after. In nursing school, I convinced a ditzy blonde girl that there was such a thing as cranial reflex, and she let me hit her in the head with a reflex hammer to test it out. Convincing everyone in a GTA 5 lobby that I was a 27-year-old Indian immigrant from New Delhi and that I was bartending for my uncle who owned a hotel in Tampa. I kept up the voice impression and story for an hour or more. The people there legitimately believed everything I said. Maybe not at first, but by the end they did. I broke the horrible news to them right before I left. They were so devastated. I told the new guy at work to top up the pressure in the forklift tires. They're solid rubber, by the way. After he spent about 30 minutes doing God knows what, he came up and said he couldn't find the right fitting for the air hose, so I told him to check the basement. There was no basement in our building. He wasted almost half of his day looking for crap that didn't exist. He also cut a piece of plywood too short and asked for help. I told him to go and ask the boss for the board stretcher. From my experience, trolls aren't very useful. Well, maybe as frontline troops. They're dumb as all hell, but they can take a beating, and you really don't care when they die. Not that I'd care anyway, but bygones are bygones. I've got one pointy tooth, it's my canine, and I had a girl convinced for over an hour that I was half vampire. I'm originally from a place called Saskatchewan. It's not really hard to pronounce, it's just like it's spelled, but if you haven't heard it a lot, it can be intimidating to try and read out loud. I briefly moved to Portland, Oregon, and whenever anyone would try to say it, usually correct or very close, I'd always say, "So close, just a little bit off," and they'd try again with a random inflection. I had one woman going every week or so for the entire year and a half that we both lived there. One time I broke into the bathroom of this really crazy school. I was having a good time until some punk with round glasses and his ginger sidekick shoved a wand into my nose and I passed out from the pain. 3 out of 10 wouldn't recommend. I'm in the dumb math class, so I'll just name a few I've managed to pull off this month. The first one was convincing literally over half the class that there were 14 original colonies, not 30. This was especially good as we'd been studying American history and learning about the start of the US. On Tuesday, December 13th, my teacher asked for the date and everyone obviously said, the 13th. So I gasped and said, "It's Friday the 13th!" A girl in front of me screamed, "Oh my God, really?" And after a good 30 seconds, someone said something along the lines of, "It's Tuesday." To which the girl turned around and said, "Don't play me like that." I think I've convinced a couple of family members that potatoes are responsible for 1% of the deaths in the US. What's the dumbest reason you've been fired? On Thursday, my boss has her daughter's dance recital that she had been planning for months. 3 days prior, I was asked to be a date to a wedding. I said yes and asked my boss, who immediately said no. We ended up getting coverage, and the wedding and the recital went off without a hitch. However, Thursday and Friday night, I'd started on some new meds for my incredibly serious illness beginning with a C, and they made me incredibly drowsy. So much so to the point that I overslept by 2 hours. On Friday, I started calling my boss, I have call logs, and as soon as she hears it's me, she hangs up on me. This happened 6 times before I make it to work, alternating between her cell and the store telephone. As soon as I get there, I try to plead my case and clock in. She immediately tells me to clock out as I'm a no-clock, no-show. I don't understand how this is possible, especially given the call logs and the fact that I'm seen on the security footage, and I clocked in anyway. I tried to get her to sit down in the office to talk calmly, and she, a very devout Christian woman who rarely curses, screamed at the top of her lungs to get the frick out of her office. At this point, I'm very confused. I have no idea why she'd be so angry at me. And then I find out. The day of the wedding, my boss let me go home early and get ready. I made a post on Facebook saying, "Out of work, time to get ready." Thank God she let me out of work early for once, considering all the times I covered for her. I'm not friends with her on Facebook, and I find out the one customer I'm friends with on Facebook showed her the message while she bragged about the recital. F that noise. I know what she's trying to do. She's trying to get me another no call, no show. So I show up right on time, walk in the building to be seen on all the security cameras, clock in, and then get escorted out. Beat the system as best as I could. And tonight I spent time printing out some 40-odd emails where I covered shifts for her and did things for her that she said I didn't. I also printed out all the call logs, and I'm going to have my doctor fax first thing tomorrow for the 2 days I overslept due to my new cancer meds. 1 copy for her, 1 copy postmarked for employee organizational development. I got a phone call from my boss this morning, being told I'm getting 2 days off, paid, and we'll reconvene come Wednesday. I'm assuming they're attempting to find a store to transfer me to very far away to give me the option to relocate or quit, therefore getting out of paying my unemployment. In short, overslept, went to a wedding, made a Facebook post, employer saw it. I'm going to get fired as a result since she doesn't have to have a reason. Yay, unemployment. Okay, update. And I'm fired. HR was waiting for me the second I walked in the door. I tried to plead my case, but they just weren't having it. It's definitely one of the worst days of my life right now, as reality is starting to set in. I mean, of course they had that ambush set up the moment you came in. Sorry that happened to you, dear author. It sounds like a raw deal. You probably shouldn't have made that post. That's a learning moment right there. I hope you've moved on to better things and that the wedding was an absolute rager to somewhat compensate for what happened to you. I worked midnights at a steel mill as a very young adult for 2 years. I had access to the entire network to do some of my work, even though I was just a general laborer. Union shop. Long story short, someone had left their login and password in a file on the public directory. I, being the good little worker, pointed it out to my direct supervisor. From there, I thought it was over. Turns out, he took this account that belonged to a wonderful older woman that also happened to have unrestricted access and logged into very adult websites at work. He was busted. What does he do? He points the finger at me and says I'm the one that gave him the password and login. Blam. Fired for, quote, hacking a corporate network. I got fired for turning in my 2-week notice. WorldCom sucked anyway. I got fired for turning in and working my notice and then not going back to work. We regret to inform you that due to your prolonged absence, we can no longer wish for you to work here. I quit 2 months ago. I worked in this costume shop, and my boss, who was obviously very unhappy with her life, had built this place up in her head and acted like we were some designer store on Rodeo Drive. In my free time, I wrote for a couple of local blogs and magazines and went to events, Fashion Week, and things like that. I always got invites to these events, and she never did, and she'd always say it was because she's too important for them, so people were too intimidated to invite her. When I'd work the day after an event, she'd pick on me the entire day and say the event was probably lame and all the people there had to be tacky. She even got in my face and called me a working girl one day because a guy from one of the events recognized me and said hello while I was working. Finally, after I got an amazing opportunity and got to cover Fashion Week and go for free and everything, I went into work and she told me I was fired. I'd betrayed her. Plus side is, I immediately got offered a job at an actual clothing store with benefits and commission. No more selling pimp and hot dog costumes. I saw a dishwasher at the old restaurant I worked at get fired because one of the cooks at the time got mad and threw a plate across the kitchen. The plate shattered, and seconds after, the owner walked in and without any further inquiry fired the person responsible for washing the dishes. I can beat this. My boyfriend worked in a restaurant where a waitress got fired after a dishwasher threw a plate across the kitchen at her face and cut her badly enough that she needed stitches. Management claimed they never saw the dishwasher throw the plate, and so they fixed the squeaky wheel and fired the waitress. I was scheduled to work on a Friday and got diagnosed with mono on a Monday. I don't know if you've ever had mono, but it knocks you on your butt pretty hard. I showed my employer my note on Monday and was promptly picked up by my mother and brought home to get taken care of properly. I got a text from my boss on Friday saying that I needed to come in or I was fired. When I reminded him I had mono, he said that my job was to sit at a desk and take to-go orders. I also check to-go orders, which means I have direct contact with people's food. Dumbest crap ever. 8-hour shift by myself most days. Management sent me to deposit money into the bank when we were overflowing with cash. I wrote schedules when the manager needed me to. I was getting bonuses weekly from the home office because of my sales and customer service. I never cheated, I never stole, I loved that job. I envisioned myself working there until after I graduated college. Sure, I wasn't being paid crap, but they were flexible with my school hours, and that's all I really wanted at the time. They closed a store a city over, which my boss's wife happened to manage due to poor sales. They decided to promote my boss to regional and move her over to my store and have her manage it. She's been with the company 15 years, so it's cool. Whatever. I've met her a couple of times. Within a day of her being there, she starts telling me everything I'm doing is wrong. Within 2 days, I'm being written up for the first time ever in 4 years because I clocked in 5 minutes before my shift was supposed to start. My previous manager always had me clock in as soon as I came in so I could get to work on shipment and phone orders. Day 3 rolls around, the new manager has a girl from her former store come in and fill out an application and wants me to show her the ropes of how things work here. Day 4, the old boss, who's now regional manager, catches me before I walk in. Can't look me in the face at all during the conversation. Reason for termination? Poor sales. I guess I got it lucky. They fired me in November. They fired the assistant manager who'd been there 8 years right before Christmas. I felt worse for her. She had kids. But yeah, I don't hold a grudge or anything. I needed it for a dose of reality. Up until that point, I thought a loyal employee meant a loyal employer. Yep. I've been relatively lucky with bosses who at least had something resembling a sense of decency towards their employees, but this is far from an uncommon experience for people who make their work their life. The Michael Scotts of the world will throw the Dwights under the buses at the drop of a hat. I was fired from an ice cream shop for not being gay. It turned out the manager was looking to replace the young girl who'd been working there before me and who she'd been having a lesbian relationship with. Apparently, my general manager lost out on his Christmas bonus because too much money had gone missing on his watch, so he was super angry. So he comes in one night, he wasn't working, and asks to see this tiny little 18-year-old kid who'd just been promoted like 2 weeks prior outside. I was 21 at the time, and the other manager was maybe 5'5" and 120 pounds soaking wet. About 20 minutes later, the GM comes back in, rubbing his knuckles, and looks me in the eye and says, "Hey Paul, I'm going to need you to clean up some blood." So in shock, I go outside and sure enough there's blood all over the back smoking and garbage area. I start to clean it up while he stands and watches me while telling the sap story of his life and money woes and how much this kid deserved it. He then goes home and the rest of the staff and I are just kind of standing there shocked that this just happened. About an hour later, the 18-year-old manager comes back and his face is barely recognizable. I told him to go to the hospital, but he refused for whatever reason, and he said he called the cops and asked me to back up his story, which I told him I would. So another half hour or so passes, and the cops show up at Taco Bell, and I give them a statement that's completely truthful. Chatted with the cops for a while, give them some free tacos, and then head home for the night. Next day, I come into work, and the GM asks to see me outside. Now, I'm 6 foot tall and 275 pounds and grew up in a rougher neighborhood, so I'm not some easy target, and at that point I was almost eager for him to hit me so I can teach him a lesson. He got in my face and it seemed like he was weighing up his options, but he decided against it and just asked me if I talked to the cops, to which I replied yes, and I'm surprised he hadn't been arrested already. He then says, "Finish out your shift and don't bother coming back. You're fired." So I said, "Oh hell no. If you're going to fire me, you have to have the stones to do it in front of everyone." So I walk back inside, ask all of the staff that were there to gather around, and that the GM has something he'd like to say. So put on the spot, he fires me then and there, and I go home to call the labor board to see how badly I can sue their butts for wrongful termination. Turns out I can't. I hadn't worked there long enough and didn't make enough money, which really ticked me off. I hated that job anyway, and I got another one pretty quickly, so it wasn't a huge deal, but it still blows my mind, and people rarely believe me when I tell the story. In short, I was fired from Taco Bell where I was manager because my general manager beat the crap out of one of the others for stealing from the register. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked at a gas station in Chicago, making about $700 a week. I had one day off a month, and I had to come in to do inventory on that day. I didn't mind all the hours because the pay was good. Anyways, I came down with an infection near my eye and went to the ER. The doctor told me I had to be admitted. I said I couldn't do that because I had to work. He told me best case scenario, I'd lose my eye, but that more likely the infection would go to my brain and I'd die. So I called work and let them know I was in the hospital. Spent 4 days there hooked up to an IV that gave me 24 hours of antibiotics a day. Finally got out and went to work and got fired because of it. He told me it was because he needed someone for that shift and he really couldn't let them go after just hiring them. And to top it off, he fought my unemployment claim. The company was too small to sue them over it. The guy only owned 2 gas stations. To sue under the FMLA, the employer has to have more than 50 employees. He had a total of 7. I spoke with 3 different lawyers and they all said the same thing. They were all very disappointed about that. I think they wanted to sue him more than I did. So, I understand this is only marginally relevant, but it definitely ranks among the dumbest firings of all time. It turns out the entire crew of the Titanic was fired effective the morning of the 15th of April 1912. Yep, that's right, before the ship even entirely sank, everyone was fired. And get this, it was for abandoning ship and disembarking on the high seas. And by the way, this was all employees, even the dead ones. When the few that survived made it to shore, they had nothing. No money, no employer, no support, nada. Of course, the whole thing was a maneuver by the White Star Line to avoid paying out to families the wages and pensions and insurance claims that would be generated. Luckily, subsequent lawsuits reversed a lot of this. If you want an example of asinine employer jerkery, well, it's hard to beat that. I lost my phone the night of my college's senior formal. That night, I got a call from my boss announcing an emergency meeting the following morning, which obviously I missed, and I was immediately fired along with 2 of my colleagues. So stupid. The meeting was to review 5 new menu items. I got fired from my university sports center job as a pool lifeguard for posting on Facebook that I found substances in a toilet there. The next day I had a phone call asking me to remove said status, and shortly afterwards an email to inform me that my employment had been terminated on grounds of besmirching the university's good name. No joke, HR actually used the word besmirching. I would have been impressed if I wasn't so furious. The university is in the UK, if anyone was wondering. Well, I hope that you went full fire and fury on your old workplace and published a laundry list of every other crappy thing that you saw go on there. You probably didn't, given that you wanted to find another job, but they deserved it. Although most of us know that there's a reasonable risk of firing if we post something like that. I was once fired from a radio news director job for being, quote, a loose cannon. I never know what you're gonna do next. This was in reference to news stories and when they aired. I guess I should have shown him my magic calendar that told me when and where news would happen. I was fired 2 years into a position that I was really great at for not wearing any makeup and answering the phone on 2 rings, not 1 ring. I was fired by the store manager who was there for 1 week. The owner was furious at him, but I refused to go back. I was fired for refusing to help my boss forge receipts for his tax audit. I had the best college job in the world, watching the library computer labs on campus. I had about 4 shifts of varying length every week, and I'd always show up on time. Very rarely had someone cover, and I would pick up a shift every other week or so. There was rather a large automated system, so my boss knew I was among the more reliable lab attendants, which he even admitted after firing me. Anyway, there is 1 meeting before the start of each semester, and if you didn't show up for the meeting, you're fired. End of story. There was nothing important at the meeting. If you sent an email letting him know you weren't back in school yet, he wouldn't fire you. When you consider the meeting would last about 15 minutes and there was really nothing to cover, it's all very arbitrary. He just had to fire a few people a year to make his job look important. I sent an email saying I wouldn't be on campus yet, but he didn't receive it. He sent me an email at the start of semester letting me know I was fired, which is kind of like breaking up with someone via Twitter. I replied asking to meet him in person, which he pretty much never did with any of us, except for that 1 meeting, and after going back and forth I was finally able to meet him and I showed him the email I sent. He admitted it was very hard to fire me as I was a very reliable lab attendant and picked up shifts no one wanted. He'd still probably have to fire me using the excuse, well, what else do I say to the other 2 people I fired for the same reasons? What if they come up with an email too? I asked if I was in fact still fired and he said, I'll have to think about it. I requested very clearly that at the very least he call me or have me come by his office to tell me I was fired. 3 days later, he sent me another email saying I was still fired. Mainly, I was angry that I was fired by email, and this guy, who was such a lazy, useless boss that he contacted me all of 0 times the year I worked in the labs, didn't even have the stones to fire me in person. I was subbing for an 8th grade history teacher once. He had about 4 periods of the same course, and all I needed to do was play a PowerPoint, which included a video, and read the slides aloud to the students. Prior to the last class of the day, one of the students messed around with the computer, and the PowerPoint was no longer usable or I couldn't find it. I don't remember, I just know I was crap out of luck at that point. Luckily, the teacher had printed out the PowerPoint slides for me and I'd remembered almost everything that was on the video. I'm also a good teacher and I'm pretty good with improv. I started delivering the information from memory and was pretty entertaining, but I got a bit carried away with myself when I said, and then the king said, let's get those French bastards, and war began, or something to that effect. The important thing is that I swore. The next day, the principal called me into his office and said some students reported me for saying the B word. I knew I'd made a mistake, but I hadn't used the term directed at students, and never mind the fact that I improvised the lesson from memory and on the spot. Never mind the fact that the students were entertained and spent the whole of the lesson giving me their undivided attention and asking excellent follow-up questions, a sign of engaged learning. I was removed permanently as a sub for that school because of this one incident. I was and still am a very talented substitute, but I get into occasional trouble because students refuse to speak to me if they have an issue and instead choose to report me out of context to their principal. I truly hate my job because of the terrible imbalance of power both students and teachers hold over subs. I always feel like I'm about to lose my job, no matter if I'm a very active, great sub or if I'm a lazy, passive sub. There is no victory. My first aircraft maintenance job out of college. I was working for a guy running a small shop at a rural airport. He was quite a character. A real hardliner that had the highest expectations of me and the other employee and would get angry if we took too long, in his opinion, to do something. For example, we got an aeroplane in for our 100-hour inspection that was obviously long overdue and crap was completely neglected on the previous one. The spark plugs were so caked with lead that it took me an hour to clean them out. He got mad that it took longer than the typical half hour and wouldn't hear any of my excuses. He'd get mad at me for taking too long to cut open an air filter in spite of his shop being a complete mess and it taking me 10 minutes to find the filter cutter. Even he didn't know where it was. Despite these factors, he rarely did any work himself and set a bad example for us or downright messed it up. But he sat in the office allowing me, a completely green apprentice, and his other employee, a 4th-year apprentice, to work unsupervised, and would take hour-long coffee breaks. If the other employee or I would get up to head back to work before he was done with his coffee, he'd tell us to sit and relax. Anyway, when my 3-month probationary period was ending, he called me into his office and started grilling me about random aircraft knowledge. Again, since I was fresh out of school and that was my first job, I had very little practical knowledge, and looking back now, half the crap he was asking was stuff even a 2 to 3 year journeyman would be unlikely to know. So of course, I didn't know the answers to a lot of the questions. He got angry, as usual, and started ranting about the terrible quality of graduates the college was turning out, and how he was going to phone them and complain, and then he sent me back to work saying he had to think long and hard about whether he wanted to keep me on. I thought about it for the rest of the day and was pretty sure he was going to fire me, so the next morning I showed up, and as soon as he arrived I told him I was quitting, packed up my tools and left. I got a better job a week later at a reputable company that did things by the book, working supervised under a journeyman, and received absolutely glowing performance reviews and a good reference when I left for another job. In short, had a sketchy first job, and I quit before the boss fired me. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.